Chapter 295. If the Bardi Empire didn't even know that a war had broken out in its own territory, then the Bardi Empire wouldn't be worthy of being called a mega-empire. Everything that happened at Port Victoria had already reached the Bardi Empire's capital, Stara, through various channels. Driven by people with ulterior motives, not to mention the nobles, even the commoners were discussing this sudden war on the streets. The undead plains had been opened, and the undead army had arrived. This became the hottest topic of discussion, especially when the furious Dragon Knight Archduke Halent had punched an elder from the Senate, who had asked for evidence, to the point where his mouth was covered in blood. Then, Halent shoved a memory crystal that recorded the battle into the elder's mouth, which made this topic even more interesting. Alright then, the price he had to pay was probably Emperor Halent's fury and half a year of confinement. Meanwhile, that unlucky Marquis who had been beaten up so badly had been shouting that he wanted to take revenge on Halent. In the end, a flying dragon had suddenly passed by and set fire to his mansion. Yep, we all knew what had happened. Look, it's those undead. The scene of the endless undead flooding into the capital was vividly described. The memory crystal was repeatedly read by the upper echelons of the Bardi Empire, and public opinion began to change. The high-level undead in the capital were having quite a difficult time. What was even worse was the series of changes caused by undead Emperor Asso's death. In order to better control the situation, many high-level undead in the capital were Asso's subordinates. They had signed a master-servant contract that promised to live and die with him. On the day that undead Emperor Asso died, the survivors were shocked and even terrified when their companions suddenly collapsed. After all, in their minds, undead emperors were undying existences just like true gods. This was no different from the sky collapsing. On the other hand, the desecration plane was connected to the mortal plane. Most of the undead here came from the desecration plane. When a mega CEO of a company suddenly died, a significant portion of the middle-level managers died together with him. It was only natural that the middle-level and lower-level employees would be panicking. At such a critical moment, the living's attitude suddenly changed, causing the undead to not know what to do. They became even more cautious, especially when going in and out of the capital, afraid that there would be any conflicts. The most incomprehensible part was the attitude of the ruler of this country, Aulus XIII. Roland angrily berated Halent for causing trouble and refused to accept Halent's request to meet with him. However, he didn't punish Halent at all. Roland comforted the undead with words, but he didn't do anything to control the public's opinion. He allowed the rumors to spread everywhere. His attitude was quite ambiguous, and his methods were quite contradictory. When the capital was in a state of chaos, he either closed his doors and refused to go out, or he suddenly had the mood to go hunting and sightseeing in the suburbs. His subordinates had no idea what this venerable old emperor was thinking. At this moment, a sudden downpour assaulted Aulus's caravan. This battle that had started and ended abruptly was about to come to an end. Speak. Who sent you to assassinate His Majesty? The 26th Prince? Or the 8th Prince? The leader of the assassins was already missing a limb, and the pool of blood on the ground had already exceeded the lethal level. He could die at any moment, but the Emperor's personal bodyguards were still unwavering in their interrogation. It's the 8th Prince. Don't kill me, don't kill me. I already told you, hurry up and help me stop the bleeding. Since Aulus had come to a conclusion and ignored the assassin's pleas for help, the guard directly reported to Aulus and asked if he should bring the remaining assassin back alive. However, Aulus slowly shook his head, indicating for the guard to directly execute the assassin. You're not going to ask? Perhaps there's more to it than meets the eye. Inside the carriage was Halent, who should have been locked up at home. The two of them weren't the only ones in the carriage. The last person in the carriage was the black-clothed mage who always followed Emperor Aulus. However, he seemed to be sleeping right now. Halent wasn't surprised by the sudden invitation and the subsequent assassination attempt. If Aulus XIII didn't have some special methods, the Fox-Scorpion Emperor would have been secretly decapitated long ago. That's meaningless. Assassinations like this happen once or twice a week. Anyone who dares to assassinate the Emperor, no, it should be said that they're here to die. They've long since stopped caring about their own lives. Since they said that it was Little 8 who did it, then it's actually possible that it was someone else apart from Little 8. Oh, judging from the information I've obtained recently, they've improved quite a bit as well. They're quite good at hiding the truth within the lies. Little 8 is definitely a suspect. Yep, judging from Little 8's increasingly extreme personality, there's a 70% chance that he's acting on his own in order to frame his brother. Little 8's temperament has improved quite a bit recently. Even though Halent was clearly talking about the unfortunate fact that his adopted sons wanted to kill him, he was smiling quite amicably. His tone even contained a hint of pride, as if he was an elder praising his filial and capable grandson. From a certain standpoint, he was indeed quite proud of himself. The fact that several dozen princes were competing against each other in scheming was something that this seemingly benevolent old man had single-handedly created. It seemed that he was using this method to choose his successor. Halent didn't reply. He didn't intend to care about the royal family's matters, nor did he have any interest in caring about them. He was only interested in why Emperor Aulus would suddenly invite him out in such a private manner. And whenever he mentioned what was happening in the West, Emperor Aulus would always smile mysteriously and say, "You'll know soon enough." Actually, due to certain reasons, Emperor Aulus had been in quite a good mood recently. He sank into reminiscence as he looked at the rainy scenery outside his window. More than 30 years ago, it was also on a rainy day like this. It was also on a similar day that the royal palace was slaughtering each other. Aulus was on his last breath when he met Asso here. He told Asso of his unwillingness to die here, which changed his fate. From that day onward, Aulus, who had been looked down upon, obtained the power of the shadows. He slowly climbed to the peak, and now, 30 years later, his achievements and prestige even surpassed all previous emperors. However, only he knew that he had to pay the price for all the help he had received in the past. This creditor of his wouldn't be easy to deal with. Of course, how could an ambitious person who was capable of forcing his adopted sons to slaughter each other to determine who would become the strongest be willing to be controlled by others? Aulus had always had his own plans, as well as his own sharp swords hidden in the shadows. However, the situation changed yet again before Aulus's thousands of preparations could even be carried out. The undead's greatest miscalculation was that they didn't expect that the powerful Emperor Asso would choose to sacrifice himself. Aulus's weakness in Asso's hands naturally disappeared with Asso's death. The undead's original strategy was to control the old emperor and gradually insert the high-level undead into all levels of the empire, gradually eating away at this country. But now that Asso had died, all 6 of the death planes had been opened, and the entire situation had changed. The chess game has been messed up again. Nobody responded to Aulus's sigh. That's right, the situation had changed yet again. Some people had gone from chess pieces to chess players, while others had been sacrificing chess pieces without realizing it. Now that Ael's death caused a chain reaction, nobody knew what to do next. Your Majesty, about Victoria Harbour, Halent, don't be in such a hurry. When we get there, I'll introduce someone to you. You can talk to her, and she'll probably have a different way of thinking about many things. The old emperor smiled as he spoke to Halent. The carriage turned into a forest, and the carriage fell silent as it soon entered a deep valley. Right after that, Halent felt a strange feeling of dizziness. He paused for a moment before realizing that he had probably been teleported. Just as he was about to ask something, a familiar female voice spoke up from outside. "Little Aulus, it seems that you have a guest today." Aulus heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this voice as he muttered in a low voice, "I'm quite lucky this time. I'm quite lucky this time. I met the easiest person to deal with. Yep, Aboyo's grandson, Mina's great-grandson. You've probably met him before. Now that the situation has changed, I think it's time for him to meet you." The situation has changed? Are you referring to Asso's death, or are you referring to the fact that the death planes have all been successfully connected? Even here, I know quite clearly. Both, but that's not all. The darkness outside the carriage dissipated, and Halent inhaled a cold breath when he saw the voice clearly. He was surrounded by stone walls, as if they were underground. That gentle female voice came from a silver dragon head the size of a small mountain. Such pure draconic might? Is that an immemorial dragon? An immemorial dragon? Or an even more ridiculous relic from a mythical or epic era? Dragons were the most important in terms of power level and power level. Halent was suppressed to the point where he couldn't even move in front of a dragon that was far superior to him. Lady Evelyn, even if you can sense what's happening in the outside world, you definitely won't be able to guess who caused all of this to happen. The silver dragon head revealed an expression that seemed like it was smiling yet not smiling, as if it saw a naughty child teasing an adult. Apart from Roland, who else could it be? Even the little item I prepared for him was triggered. How could I not know? The silver dragon head, which was abnormally human-like, revealed an expression of reminiscence, as if it was reminiscing about the past. But then, it revealed a playful smile. You came at the perfect time. After hearing about Roland, those two fellows had a good fight and are now asleep. Heh, that's wonderful. Right, Halent probably met that person this time. Lady Evelyn, you can ask him about his situation. The silver dragon looked at Halent in a friendly manner. Only now did Halent notice that the draconic might around him had disappeared. But before he could say anything, an astonishing angry roar came from behind him. Roland. Where's Roland? Stand there and don't move. I'm going to kill you. As if Roland's name had woken up some existence, there was a deafening angry roar, followed by an incredibly corrosive green breath that directly melted the entire cave wall. Asterisk bang. Asterisk a gigantic black shadow smashed into the cave wall, causing the entire cave to shake and debris to fall. The gigantic black dragon head that suddenly reached out shook in front of the humans who were scurrying around like rats. The dragon's gigantic eyes looked all around, but it seemed that it didn't find the man it hated so much. It then retracted its head and went back to sleep. At this moment, Halent finally got a clear look at the dragon's true appearance. It was an exquisite and beautiful gigantic beast, an existence that far surpassed any ordinary immemorial dragon. A three-headed dragon, and it's even a different dragon head. A silver dragon, a black dragon, and a sapphire dragon. A good dragon, an evil dragon, and a neutral dragon all fused into one. Dragon God above. How is this possible? This is blasphemy. This is the most vicious of curses. Arladanti wasn't a large country. Most of its population was concentrated in the capital city of magic, Arlo. But as a mega empire, it was still several dozen times larger than the Donglan Principality. Alright, I admit that the main reason was that Donglan was too small. After all, in the eyes of most humans, the entire Northlands was just an unimportant border region that people didn't pay much attention to. In fact, it was only now that news of the war against the Beastmen had reached us. I never thought that I'd be able to return. It seems that there hasn't been much change. Arladanti's streets were incredibly clean. Stone puppets were constantly sweeping the streets. It wasn't even night yet, but all the magical street lamps were lit up. The magical signboards of the shops on both sides of the streets were still active, occasionally flashing with sparks. It was as if the battle with the Bardi Empire hadn't affected them at all. The citizens of Arladanti slowly walked on the streets, leisurely going about their daily lives. Thanks to the Archmage's outstanding talent in teleportation magic, the business district here was world famous. Not only could one see the specialties of various countries and regions, one could even see rare treasures and beasts from other dimensions. After all, the mags had traveled far and wide. They even had residences in other dimensions. The people here were already used to seeing all sorts of strange things. When our Ivy League airship entered this city, it didn't even cause much astonishment. The citizens only looked at the gigantic shadow in the sky and muttered, "What strange thing did the Lord Mage create this time?" before going about their own business. But today, they were destined to be astonished. That was because I was here. Roland, I was back. Chapter 296. Although we and the Wood Spirits envoys had already arrived in this city 2 days ago, the negotiations with the mage country's nominally highest authority, the Truth Symposium, had yet to begin. This wasn't because they were putting on airs or simply avoiding us. It was simply because we had arrived at the wrong time. The Truth Symposium was still nothing more than an empty shell. Request for an emergency hearing? However, There are currently 28 Truth Overseers, and 6 of them are currently at the Bardi Empire's front lines. With less than half of the 28 Truth Overseers present, there's no way for us to have a banquet. The other Truth Overseers? Well, generally speaking, it would be quite good if more than half of the Truth Overseers' whereabouts were known. Right now, there were only 6 Truth Overseers in the Cloud Tower, so there was no way for them to hold a meeting. At the very least, he had to wait until he had 10 people. Why don't we just wait for the regular meeting next month? The Mystical Blades Aloso was one of the most famous ice mags of the current generation. Aloso, who was half a step into semigod rank, had once been a member of the Truth Overseer. When we first arrived, he was the one who received me and explained my suggestion. Judging from his undisguised passion and the hug he gave me to thank me when we met, the information on the mags of Ice Eon that I directly gave him seemed to be to his liking, and he benefited greatly from it. Roland, I really didn't expect that we would meet again one day. The King of Truancy had actually become so mature one day. As the Dean, I am very gratified. This elderly mage had a voluptuous figure that was rarely seen among mags. He was famous for being a nice person in the Cloud Tower. Right now, he was smiling like a Metria Buddha. As he spoke, he even laughed and patted his large belly, causing his fat to jiggle. We really did have a teacher-student relationship. The elementary school that Cade and I had studied at was also a subordinate school of the Mystical Blade. Back then, the head of academic affairs was Aloso himself. Now, he was also the principal of this school, which was why my graduation certificate even had Aloso's stamp and signature. Although we were teacher and student, our relationship wasn't that of Heloise and Amelia's. In order to explain things clearly, I would first have to introduce the mage country's special political structure. This country was not so much an independent country, a place where a certain class ruled over others, but more like a collection of extremely large research institutes. Arlo, in the ancient language, meant those who seek knowledge. This was also the name of this city. Arlodanti, on the other hand, meant the gathering place of those who seek knowledge. This name probably explained a lot. The foundation of this country's governance wasn't the nobles. The so-called nobles were nothing more than local officials who managed the country's administration. Although this was the mage country, the true rulers wouldn't be pure lone mags. The entire mage country was made up of countless large, medium, and small mage organizations. Mags would often choose the mage organization that was most suitable for them. The ones who spoke the loudest would always be the mage organization. Among the larger organizations, there were various factions and small organizations. The key difference was that the mags had different paths of understanding and pursuit of the truth. I want to prove the astral magic's revelation to fate. Archmage Rodriguez had this idea, which resulted in the famous Star Revelation Mage organization. Their spells, prophecies, and constellation magic were all top-level in the world. However, most of their members were otakus and lacked practical combat experience. It would be quite impressive if they could even use half of their combat power in actual combat. I want to reach the pinnacle of magical combat. Archmage Levister had this idea, which resulted in the Mystical Blade Mage organization. Their members were usually the rare type of mags who specialized in practical combat. They excelled in all sorts of combat spells and magical combat techniques. Half of their classes were practical combat lessons, and their growth was often a history of combat. Being able to fight against 2 mags at the same level was already quite rare. They had plenty of practical combat techniques and minor incantations. However, it would be quite difficult for them to produce any top-level theoretical results. Alright then, although these 2 mage organizations were both the strongest mage organizations in Arlodanti, they had quite a bad relationship with each other. It could be seen as the difference between a theoretical faction and a practical faction. Or perhaps it could be said that it was a battle between a liberal arts faction and a science faction. However, this difference wasn't absolute. Great Saint Marguerite was a member of a small faction in the Star Revelation Mage organization. However, she had traveled all over the world and would definitely be quite skilled in combat. From a certain standpoint, I counted as a member of the Mystical Blade as well. Even if I ignored their annoying elemental magic, at the very least, I had quite a deep understanding of undead magic. On the other hand, a creator's ideals would often change as time passed. For example, the founder of the Sword of Order Mage organization was a fervent believer of the Holy Light. Their research topics were related to Order divine arts, the power of faith, and the application of Holy Light to magic. However, in recent times, the changes were so great that it could infuriate the founder to death. Perhaps it was because the Sword of Order's understanding of magic's natural laws and concepts had gone too far, or perhaps it was because things would always move in the opposite direction when pushed to the extreme. The Sword of Order had long since abandoned Holy Light magic and focused on the most bizarre things. For example, undead magic, demon summoning, and Eastern talismans. The Sword of Order was definitely the home of a small group of researchers. Their research on all sorts of forbidden spells was one of the best in the entire world. The relationships between the various mage organizations were also quite messy. Some small mage organizations would be attached to several large mage organizations at the same time because their core members were all from those large mage organizations. However, those large mage organizations had terrible relationships with each other, so the mage organizations didn't know who to support during every academic conference. Don't underestimate the academic conference. This was the most important conference in the mage country. Every time there was a contradictory argument, the conference room would instantly become an arena. That's right, the most important conference in the mage country was the academic conference, not some serious political conference. Since every mage organization's goal was to pursue the truth, their disputes could only be considered academic discussions. And in the mage country, the highest-level academic conference was the Truth Symposium. Yep, the Truth Symposium was also the highest authority in the mage country. The number of participants in the Truth Symposium wasn't fixed. Archmages with excellent research results and reputation would be invited, and they would receive the unofficial title of Truth Overseer. But actually, many undying individuals were completely uninterested in such a symposium where no conclusion could be reached. They would reluctantly participate in a few symposiums before feeling that it wasn't worth it to suffer for the sake of a false reputation, so they would think of ways to retire early. The reason? The Truth Symposium was divided into regular meetings and emergency meetings. Any mage who reached a certain power level could apply to attend the symposium, to cheer for their boss. When I was still an acolyte, I had attended 2 symposiums. 30% of the symposium was spent bragging about their own research results, 50% of the symposium was spent attacking each other for plagiarism or for being completely worthless, and the remaining 20% of the symposium was spent fighting over budget and resources, as well as fighting over the next generation of outstanding mags. As for administrative matters, once the symposium's saliva dried up and they couldn't fight anymore, the last 5 minutes of the symposium were used to quickly pass all sorts of government decrees. That was incredibly efficient. Before the symposium's title was even read out, everyone raised their hands, and before the documents were even signed, they all teleported away. With such a boss, it was truly a pity that the officials in charge of administrative matters had such a boss. It's just a farce. Everyone's so stubborn, and they're all top-level experts in their own fields. Who's going to be able to convince anyone with just words? There's also a strict rule that we can't fight. By the end of the debate, it's no longer about who's more reasonable. It's about who's louder, who's more spirited, and who can last longer. This was also why the mage country hadn't started invading other countries for thousands of years. It wasn't that ambitious mags were useless, but it would be as difficult as a hen trying to climb a tree to convince the other archmages in a symposium to pass a resolution of war. It would be better to use one's personal strength to conquer an entire country. This was also why it was said that the mage country wasn't even a country at all. For truly pure mags, their entire world consisted of research labs and libraries. They were far too lacking in ambition for territory and glory, which was the exact opposite of the rulers of this world. With such a political system, it was impossible for the Truth Symposium to discuss the truth. However, it was quite easy for enemies to form. There were far too many instances of different viewpoints, arguments, and even meet me at Nakayama Park after the symposium. Every time I passed by Nakayama Park, I would see all sorts of hand-to-hand combat scenes, forbidden magic duels. Many of the participants were old, white-haired professors. Not only were there cultured hoodlums, mags, there were even quite a few mags who knew martial arts. Participating in a long and meaningless symposium once or twice was already unbearable. If it was a small organization or a lone mage, their research results would be questioned, which would be even more displeasing. That was why the symposium would always be delayed due to too many absentees. Since there was no difference between having a symposium and not having a symposium, it would actually make people happy to postpone the symposium. However, only the leaders of the 18 strongest mage organizations were required to attend this symposium that would be held regularly. They were far too important, and it would be impossible for them to ignore this symposium. From a certain standpoint, this also caused the leaders of these major mage organizations to be replaced at an incredibly fast pace. It was as if being a leader was some sort of life-threatening chore. Of course, there were always exceptions to everything. For instance, a certain witch had once taken the initiative to become the leader of this symposium. Although her main goal was to extort research funds and cover up her criminal record, she used her outstanding appearance and external disguise skills, as well as her communication ability that allowed her to sense other people's emotions. This allowed her to lead several large-scale events and even win many debates. She was highly popular and respected in both the Cloud Tower and the Mystical Blade. Yep, the witch Amelia was once a member of the Mystical Blade as well. In fact, she had even given a lecture to me and my cohort. What gave me a headache was the fact that I had to participate in this truth symposium. Not long ago, after I met with the truth overseer Oslo Wen, I received an epic-ranked quest for what I needed to do next. Congratulations to the host for triggering an epic-ranked storyline quest, Return Home in Glory or a Fallen Phoenix. Host, please participate in a truth symposium. Depending on how the symposium goes and the status of the participant, the next step of the quest will be triggered. System notification. You know the rules between mags. If you want to talk, show me something real. Judging from how this chain of quests had been triggered, the final goal of this epic-ranked quest was quite obvious. It was nothing more than to directly or indirectly affect matters related to the war between the three empires. That was why this quest was obviously a chain. First, I had to choose which side the three empires were on and obtain a certain amount of reputation. After I made my choice, I naturally had to expand my influence. Only by having a voice would I be able to influence the entire war. For me and the newly born Mist Alliance, allies were necessary. I also had to obtain the support of the mega empires that had a say in human society. Since the other mega empires were all facing problems, the mage country would probably be the most trustworthy ally of all. It would obviously be necessary to obtain the mage country's support. Based on my system's usual habit of making things difficult for me, I could guarantee that if I didn't have the status to speak at the Truth Symposium and didn't have enough influence on the Truth Symposium, things would only become more and more difficult for me. Perhaps I would even end up becoming cannon fodder for the vanguard. The delay of the Truth Symposium was both a good and a bad thing for me. The bad part was that I wouldn't be able to continue with my quest for a while. The good part was that I now had more time to prepare. Since the next Truth Symposium would be an important topic of war, I had already sent out invitations. It was also stated that I wasn't allowed to be absent, so it probably wouldn't be delayed. My current goal was to establish a sufficient amount of reputation within a short month so that I could influence the Truth Symposium's progress if necessary. So many things have happened recently. The Truth Symposium will definitely be held. At most, it'll be delayed for 1 or 2 months. Roland, wait here for a while and familiarize yourself with the environment. The situation seems to have calmed down already. 2 of them should be returning soon. At that time, we can start the Truth Symposium. Right, why don't you come to my Mage Academy and teach a few classes to pass some time? The students should be quite happy to have a senior coming back to teach classes. Only now did I recall that Aloso had previously helped me obtain the position of a special lecturer. Back then, I knew that he was trying to help me gain some status in the mage country. I never expected that he would actually want me to teach classes. After all, from a certain point of view, we can be considered as students who came out of his academy. Of course, Students who came out of this academy are completely different from those direct disciples. Many middle-sized mage organizations would have their own magic academies. They would be the cradle for newcomers as well as the arena for talent and hard work. Of course, the mage organizations wouldn't be doing this for free. Due to the existence of their magic academies, it would be quite easy for newcomers to become the new blood of their respective mage organizations. In order to become an official member of their mage organization, one would either have to perform exceedingly well or become a candidate to become an archmage's personal disciple. Mage organizations' general knowledge was limited and shallow. However, this knowledge was the essence of many years of training and training. It was also a foundational step for one to take to the next level. A truly good seedling would be able to sprout with just a bit of nutrition. Many archmages would find students suitable for themselves while teaching classes, such as Heloise and Amelia from back in the day. By the way, since Amelia were both former teachers of the Mystical Blade's subordinate magic academies, they were naturally members of the Mystical Blade as well. According to what I knew, Heloise was also a core member of the Sword of Order. She had recruited many vicious individuals to join the Sword of Order while teaching. Quite a few of them had even ended up on the calamity rankings. There were even more antisocial lunatics. She truly lived up to her nickname of Demon Professor. In fact, since the threshold to becoming a mage was too high, the tradition of children inheriting their father's legacy could no longer be maintained in spellcasters' society. Since inheritance was more about certain research results and the pursuit of the truth, the most important thing in the Mag's society was the relationship between a teacher and a student who passed on their knowledge. I absolutely can't let my teacher's inheritance end in my generation. Every mage would have the same thought. After reaching a certain level, it would be a dream to have a disciple who would be able to pass on all that they had learned and pursued. Of course, the most important inheritance would always be the pursuit of a certain goal. Unlike the rather cold relationship between teacher and disciple in other job classes, mags would have dozens or even hundreds of years of interaction. The relationship between a teacher and a personal disciple would be no different from that of a father and son or a mother and daughter. In fact, according to the mage country's laws, a teacher would have the right to arrange their personal disciple's lifestyle, while a disciple would have the duty to take care of an elderly teacher. They would also have all sorts of inheritance rights, just like children. What? Me and Heloise? There was absolutely no mage organization like ours that was constantly cursed by our mags. Right now, I was having a headache over how to improve my reputation and obtain greater authority. But soon, I began to worry about whether my reputation was too great or not. As expected, bringing those bastards along with me was definitely a mistake. Chapter 297. As expected, I should have thrown those bastards into goblin cannons and fired them to the other side of the world. No, that's still not enough. Those bastards have far more vitality than cockroaches. Even if they're thrown into the Emu Trench, they'll definitely come back alive. Sir? I should have known that I should have tied them up and tossed them into the sea. No, that's still not enough, heh. I should have just opened up the frigid winter earth and let them hibernate forever. Sir. An angry roar right in front of me finally snapped me back to my senses. However, the next instant, a female face suddenly appeared in front of me, scaring me to the core. Although you're an archmage of the Mystical Blade, as well as our teacher, you still need to follow the most basic rules. Please take this seriously. Alright then, I looked at the angry young girl in front of me. Although she was also wearing the Mystical Blade's light blue mage robe, the armband representing discipline was rather eye-catching. As the person bailing out the criminals, I had no choice but to obediently apologize and make a promise. I'm sorry. I'll scold them properly. I definitely won't let them have the chance to do it again. In this country of mags, there were plenty of troublemakers and lawbreakers. The law enforcers were also made up of mags. As a mage guild organization that specialized in practical combat, many members of the Mystical Blade chose to work as law enforcers or discipline inspectors. Although the girl in front of me seemed young, judging from the school emblem on her chest, she had been working as a mage for at least 10 years. Since she was also a member of the Mystical Blade, she was probably even more long-winded in her lectures. Sir. Please take good care of them. I can't believe that there's someone who would do such a thing. Her increasingly long-winded lectures gave me a headache. However, I was just like an unlucky parent who had to call in their parents for failing their children's grades. All I could do was smile and accept her endless lectures. Yep, I'll definitely take good care of them. It took me so much effort to complete the bail procedures and leave the police station. Only then did the bastards behind me start jumping up and down in high spirits. Eaglestorm, don't worry, my lord. I'll definitely remember to wear pants when I go on the streets to preach. You don't need to wear clothes. All right, I don't need to bother with the old fox anymore. On the first day he arrived, he started preaching about his wild bull religion. It was to be expected that he would be arrested by the mage from the discipline department. It was only a matter of time before he would be imprisoned again. If it was only him, I wouldn't have come here to ransom him, but… Yoren, you've really disappointed me. Even an enforcer like you was sent in. This isn't Sulphur Mountain City, nor is it Defender. Don't cause trouble for me. My apologies, my lord. I really didn't know that those hooligans were so weak. But those guys are too spineless. As hooligans, they actually seek help from the law enforcement officers. Does being obedient and letting you beat me to your heart's content mean that I have a backbone? It's better to read less of those weird novels. Girls shouldn't think with their muscles. A successful city enforcement officer also needs a brain. Then, he turned his attention to the youngest prisoner. Little Tim lad. My apologies, Big Brother Roland. I'll be careful in the future. Next time, I don't think anyone will get any evidence. Next time, I won't personally go out to collect goods. I'll find an adult to take me to the black market merchants. All right then, what he meant was that he would continue. The only mistake was that someone would get evidence. Little Timlad had been the most excited ever since he arrived at the Cloud Tower. He was incredibly curious about the mysteries of magic. In just a few days, he had already exchanged all his savings from the past few years for all sorts of strange items. He even went to the black market to collect goods. Ingo, you really can't blame me for this. How would I have known that that idiotic mage would actually start a fire on the spot and test out that barbecue rack? Heh, that unlucky fellow suffered the most from the explosion. Of these two great engineers, one sold fake goods and injured someone, while the other went to the black market to collect goods and was reported. Because he was too young, the two of them believed that he was the main reason. Others would be tainted by their company, but the two of them were birds of a feather. The more they were tainted, the worse they became, and the deeper they became, the more dangerous they became. What? Someone was missing? That existence whose name had become a taboo was actually not locked up. That was so unmagical. Are you talking about that magical pet abductor who also summons a blasphemer? That half-dragon who's blinking furiously at me in his prison cell? I don't know him. I didn't see him, and neither did any of you. As expected, everyone shook their heads. None of us knew him. Yep, I didn't know him at all, so of course I didn't intend to bail him out. Nor did I want to be labeled as a pervert. So, that bastard should just obediently stay in prison for the rest of his life. Not only me, but my other accomplices also tacitly forgot about him. After all, nobody wanted to be seen as the same kind of person as him. After all, if he made the headlines on his first day here, it would be quite embarrassing for him to face others in the future. I'm not going to care about your personal matters. What about the task I handed over to you? How's it going? Of course, I wasn't bringing them along to cause trouble for myself. In fact, it was the opposite. What I wanted to do would require many helpers, and some of the tasks would probably only be taken care of by them. With your personal letter and Archmage Cade's guarantee letter, the registration procedures have been completed. The new mage organization, the Great Industrial Party, has also completed all the necessary procedures. It will be under the Mystical Blade's name, and you'll be the president. With two top-notch masters acting as guarantors, no one will be blind enough to come looking for trouble. As a great alchemist, Jinya Bayar was quite popular in this country of spellcasters. That was why I sent him to handle some procedures. This was probably why he wasn't sent to jail for selling fake goods. What about the store? Has the renovation begun? There's a small problem with that, but trust me, old Golden Tooth, I'll fix it soon. The goblin's eyes darted around. Based on my understanding of him, his words were obviously exaggerated. Yes, we will probably only need a week to clear the ruins. After that, we can rebuild the new store. Little Dimmy smiled and immediately sold him out. Ruins? The damned gnome exploded again. Ah, I knew I couldn't hand it over to you. Amelia would definitely kill me. When Golden Tooth's mad dash confirmed my guess, it was my turn to be in a bad mood. Originally, due to certain reasons, as Amelia's only disciple and relative, lover, I smoothly took over a few of Amelia's properties on Crystal Street, intending to use them as a base to do some things. However, I regretted it the second day after I took over Amelia's properties. Countless creditors swarmed over, and all sorts of IOUs and compensations accumulated were more than enough for me to buy this entire street. Not only that, I had used fake authorization documents and my real identity as Amelia's disciple to obtain the property rights, so it was only natural that I would take over all these debts. How can it be just a street? That's more than enough to buy 3 streets. Amelia, are you really not running away from your debts? Fine, I'll just treat it as me owing you. It's not like I won't have any benefits at all. From a certain standpoint, it would be quite difficult for a stranger to quickly infiltrate into a relatively closed society. Although Amelia's reputation wasn't that great, as long as she didn't die, her debts wouldn't rot. No matter what, she was still a century-old store. As long as she paid off all her debts, she would still be able to use her connections, which would be far faster than accumulating new ones. And what I lacked the most was time. Amelia's store? The great industrial party? That's right. Even if I wanted to increase my reputation, Caro's unscrupulous methods would no longer be of any use. In a mage society, there was nothing more important than research results and academic achievements. This was just like how academia was at its purest form in my previous world. Nothing could compare to actual research results. I'm an expert in elemental magic. I've received 2 Martin Award for Wisdom. I'm an unknown mage who invented the spell Iceon. I'm the vice principal of the Casso Magic Academy. I have students all over the world. Iceon, thank you. I'm a core member of the Sword of Order. Can you stop talking about that Iceon of yours? I'm the creator of the study of undead construction. Since you're from the Sword of Order, you should have read my thesis collection. That's the authority on undead creation. Or perhaps, you haven't reached the level where you can read my confidential thesis. Let's talk about Iceon instead. When research results could be transformed into actual power and wealth, the saying that knowledge was power would no longer be empty. The status of mags could be compared by academic achievements. The reason why a certain ice mage treated me so well was because I provided him with mage knowledge and information. Not only could he use it as a reference for his own research, it would also greatly increase the status of ice magic in the mystical blade. Our mystical blade now has a forbidden spell for ice magic. This would be quite impressive if I said it out loud. It could even be used to attract young ice mags to join the mystical blade. Of course, there was no need to tell me the truth that 99% of people wouldn't be able to use it. This wasn't a scam. It was common knowledge that didn't need to be said. After all, it was far too difficult to create a forbidden spell. Even if the mage didn't use it, just analyzing the forbidden spell's model and thought process would be a great help to researchers. Of course, I wasn't making a loss here. According to the basic principle of equal exchange, providing such rare and valuable information on magic spells to the mystical blade also gave me an astronomical amount of contribution points. These contribution points could then be used to exchange for other magical knowledge and secret treasures. This was the most foundational purpose of a mage organization. They would gather people with similar goals and exchange knowledge and magical materials for mutual growth. However, if I participated in this truth symposium as the mystical blade's Roland, I would likely have to face constant provocation from the Eye of Truth and other mage organizations. It would be better to participate in this truth symposium as an individual. The Great Industrial Party was a faction that focused on academic theories. Shops and workshops would be the only way to turn theories into tangible goods and money. If both were present, this would create a virtuous cycle of sustainable development. Only then would the mystical blade truly be considered a new mage organization in the mage country. I had set a goal for myself to participate in the Truth Symposium as the father of a new generation of technology. Of course, I had plenty of new technologies and playthings in my hands. No matter if it was magical engineering, for elemental swordcasters, undead magic, ice magic, or wood spirits, I had many things that I could bring out. Also, obtaining the mage country's support had always been on my list. Now was the perfect time to use these technologies to increase my reputation. I already had the technologies. As for shops and workshops, I could also use Amelia's Thorn Garden. Crystal Street was also quite lively. However, since I had trusted the wrong person, what I needed to consider now was how to rebuild it, and also how to explain to Amelia why her garden and laboratory had been completely rebuilt. However, in order to reverse Amelia's past influence and have the Cloud Tower's various organizations recognize my great industrial party and even give me the right to participate in the Truth Symposium, I would need to show a corresponding amount of power and results. From a certain standpoint, the mystical blade's small gift had helped me greatly. It allowed me to avoid the most troublesome step of accumulating power. Good morning, teacher. Your Excellency, the weather today is quite nice. Hello, would you be free to have lunch together? Senior, please go first. Along the way, there were countless people who took the initiative to greet me. Among them, there were many white-bearded old mags, and there were also many passionate and beautiful young female mags. Their humility and friendliness made the bastards following behind me feel incredulous. Brother Roland, could it be that you've been unpopular for so long that you finally couldn't bear the loneliness and decided to use that magical aphrodisiac from the advertisements? But that thing was clearly useless. Renee was rather hesitant, but she still asked in the end. Although some of her words made me feel rather displeased, and some of her words made me want to comment but not pursue the matter, I didn't say anything since this girl was one of the few who didn't have me go to the police station to take her away. This is the charm of a scholar. A little girl like you wouldn't understand. Alright then, if I didn't count all her random abilities, from a certain standpoint, this body of mine had quite a high charm stat. However, it was obviously impossible for my scholar's charm, which hadn't blossomed for a long time, to suddenly explode. The true secret was the mystical blade mage robe she was wearing. It was a dark blue mage robe. Although it wasn't particularly eye-catching, the tiger moth silk fabric embedded with star sand was the highest level material available. Of course, ordinary mags wouldn't be able to notice such small details. What they could notice was the unique style of the mage robe and the insignia on the robe's chest. All mystical blade mage robes were blue. However, this dark blue color was something only teachers could use. Still, that wasn't a big deal. After all, there were countless magic professors and lecturers in the Cloud Tower. The most important part was the 3 insignia on the robe's chest. The first insignia was a blue book with the number 443 on it. This represented that she was in the 443 batch of students after the Cloud Tower had unified the student registration system. Currently, all new students had insignia on their chests that were ranked in the top 600. That young police mage also seemed to have an insignia of around 600. This meant that to her, although I appeared young, I was actually a senior who had entered the Cloud Tower more than 200 years ago. As for the other 2 insignia, they were 2 similar winged crowns. The only difference was that the wings on the black crown were bone wings, while the crown on the white crown was covered in a layer of white ice. This was the highest honor of the mage country, the emblem of endless truth. However, these 2 insignia didn't have any meaning to them. They were the glorious proof of one's academic achievements. However, the small crown doubtlessly represented that one had reached the pinnacle of one's field of study. The black crown represented one's undead magic, while the white crown represented one's academic achievements in ice magic. The only requirement to participate in the Truth Symposium was to have such a small emblem. However, for mags who believed that knowledge was power, anyone who could obtain such an emblem would at least be a myth-rank mage, if not a semigod. I was wearing such a seemingly ordinary mage robe, but in the eyes of all the mags passing by, I was an old monster who was at least 200 years old pretending to be young. Not only that, I was also at the peak of 2 different types of magic. Perhaps I was even a truth overseer, so of course I would be polite. The reason why I was able to easily bail out these troublesome bastards was because of these insignia's effects. Apart from these insignia, there were also many other insignia that represented one's status and achievements. However, I didn't have any of them. The guy in front of me had more than 20 insignia on his chest, including 2 Dragonslayer insignia. However, he seemed to be quite displeased. After all, these insignia weren't even allowed to be taken off, and it would be quite eye-catching to wear them on the streets. It was rumored that the mage country made such a rule in order to save time and reduce disputes. After all, there were far too many old monsters here. Perhaps there was a little girl jumping around in front of you who was waiting in line for food that was actually a 1,000-year-old monster. If you tried to steal her spot, she would casually use Death's Finger to kill you. In the distant past, there were all sorts of disputes about pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger or trying to act cool only to be slapped in the face, which annoyed the law enforcement and security departments. However, ever since the mage country made this rule, anyone who saw an insignia on their chest would know whether or not they could afford to offend them, which greatly reduced the cost of public security. As I walked, I made arrangements for what to do next. Soon, we returned to Crystal Street. However, Amelia's store was now completely different from yesterday. Chapter 298. Thorn Garden, Amelia's century-old shop on Crystal Street, was no longer recognizable as it used to be. It was a cute little house decorated in a small forest. The little house in the forest and the tree house together formed a 3-dimensional building. Large amounts of vines and large trees formed the building's framework, and the lush green grass became the natural flooring. The cute little wood spirits that were busily working back and forth became diligent shop assistants, while the tall, strengthened treants became the guards. Just the fact that the shop had a completely unconventional style attracted many customers. Thank you for your patronage. Please come back again. Rosa was so busy that she was sweating profusely as she sat at the cashier's seat. However, she still smiled at the satisfied customers. Little wood spirits were running all over the place, carrying out their duties as shopping guides with warm smiles on their faces. Female mags and acolytes would also occasionally come over after hearing the news, screaming how cute or let big sister hug you. It was clearly in ruins yesterday, Gold Tooth muttered to himself. I turned around and glanced at the troublemakers who wanted me to go to the police station to get them back. Then, I glanced at the busy little elves, and I began seriously considering tossing them into a trench or sending them to the sky with a rocket. Why was there such a huge difference between humans? I couldn't help but nod in satisfaction as I looked at the little wood spirits. However, the moment that I approached the shop, "Ah, father, you're back." The moment Rosa spoke up, everyone looked at me. The astonishment and surprise in their eyes made me feel uncomfortable. Father, Little Red is working really hard. Did you see that? Father, we made quite a lot of money today. The little wood spirits happily ran over and bounced up and down as they bragged about their achievements. Everyone then looked at me with increasingly unfriendly gazes. If it wasn't for the fact that they had mystical plant components on their bodies, the wood spirits' physical appearance would be quite similar to that of elf girls. Before news of the birth of this mystical new species spread, most people would have thought that these wood spirits were just young elf girls who were dressed naturally. However, some observant people noticed that they were different from elves. However, this wasn't necessarily a good thing. He actually let such a young daughter work? What a scumbag. Look carefully. Some of the little elves don't have pointy ears. They're probably mixed bloods. Even scumbags aren't enough to describe the number of daughters he has. Just how many elves has this bastard laid his hands on? An Oni Baba? I'm so jealous. There's a serial number. Daughters in the triple digits. Wow, super scumbag. Double emblem of endless truth. Even if he's a super mage, you can't deny the fact that he's scum. Although there were some strange things mixed in, my reputation inexplicably developed in a strange direction. At such a time, how could my system forget to add insult to injury? The The reputation system has been triggered once again. A ruindant, Caro respect 20,000 20,000, the prodigal son never returns, has been converted to a ruindant, respect 168 50,000, the prodigal son never returns. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a new title, Job Class Demon Father. After equipping this title, the attractiveness of young girls has increased. The success rate of saying uncle will bring you to see the goldfish has increased. However, at the same time, it will incur the hatred of adult females. System notification: don't always blame others for tricking you. You are the source of the gentleman virus. My reputation, which I had finally managed to salvage from Carol's story, was twisted 180 degrees. It seemed that my reputation was destined to become stranger and stranger. But just as I was about to cry, a certain cheerful girl who had always been obedient suddenly jumped out to add insult to injury. Father, when mother sees how well you've managed her shop, she'll definitely be very happy. Mother, the original owner of this shop. Amelia. In an instant, I knew I was done for. Sob sob sob, my angel. God punishes scum. Don't pull me. Let me fight that scumbag to the death. Nothing can stop me from taking my revenge. So what if he's a truth-level mage? So what if he's a 200-year-old monster? So what if he can casually crush us to death? So what if he can make us fail our classes forever with a single sentence? Hey, don't let go. Don't be so materialistic. Just pull me. I should say that it was to be expected that Amelia had official support teams. As an incredibly popular teacher, the angel Amelia's fake good reputation was probably even more famous than her poor management of the shop. Since she greatly favored female students, she actually had fans of both genders. There were even some who were vomiting blood on street corners, and countless who wanted to fight me to the death. I was truly envious. I was speechless. But since everyone was pointing fingers at me, I could only helplessly look at Rosa, who seemed to have no idea what she had done and was still giggling. As expected, all pink hair is black when you cut it open. Rosa isn't black at all. It's a daughter's duty to take care of her father for her mother who's not at home. She won't be able to fool around with other girls. Alright then, her calm and brilliant smile actually made me not know how to deal with her. She wasn't like the bastards behind me, who had thick skin and could withstand training. I could just find a random gnome cannon and shoot them at them. If I did such a thing to Rosa, I would likely be accused of abusing a young girl. In the end, I could only helplessly shake my head and carry this little troublemaker who had turned from a fan into a hater into my room. As for the Oni Barber, Lolican, and other similar comments behind me, I would pretend that I didn't hear them. As for my reputation, forget it, I wouldn't count on it. After all, I hadn't been able to get a single girl back when I was studying here, so it would probably be the same this time. Since I was going to be a zero no matter what, it didn't matter how bad my reputation was. I felt that I had no regrets. I definitely didn't feel like my heart was bleeding because I wasn't able to pretend to be a mature person and become a teacher, nor was I able to get those ignorant female students. As for the tears of unwillingness in my eyes, that was definitely a misconception. Forget it, forget it. This is all fate. 99% of it was you who asked for it, alright? You asked for it all, alright? Alright then, my system and the silly cat's comments arrived just as I expected. Should I be grateful? At the very least, my system still had high hopes for me. Relax. According to my system's logical calculations, nothing is absolute. At the very least, there's still some chance, even if it's many digits below the decimal point. Do you need me to calculate for you? 0, 0, 0, 0. Just shut up. Stop rubbing salt into my wounds. I tossed all the useless stuff to the back of my mind. I was actually quite interested in some things. What are you selling right now? The goods that I ordered probably haven't arrived yet. Don't tell me that you're running a service business like the Elves' coffee shop. Yep, this was the strangest part. I had just successfully purchased the workshop in the suburbs, and Amelia's laboratory had been reduced to rubble. The goods that I ordered for magical engineering hadn't even been prepared yet. Just how did this little girl manage to create such a popular store? Although Mother isn't good at business, her research level is indeed worthy of the emblem of truth. Her products are actually quite popular among those who need them. It's just that the prices and quantity of the products are quite unreasonable. For example, magical plant seeds are incredibly strong in actual combat. They're a very popular product, but Mother actually set the price of these seeds, which cost less than 10 gold coins, at 15,000 gold coins, making it a mega luxury item. Naturally, it's impossible to sell them. On the other hand, many good products with lower prices are always sold out, but there's not much profit to be made from them. Mother is also too lazy to replenish her stock. I understood now. Actually, what Amelia lacked wasn't research results. As a top-level botanical expert, how could she possibly lack research results? Rather, she had a trustworthy financial expert. Most importantly, Amelia herself trusted. Her pricing was completely based on her own preferences. She would simply put the byproducts of her research on the shelves at a random price. She never considered the possible returns when creating her research projects, so how could she possibly not make a loss? So, you're saying that you're simply repricing the goods in your inventory. Apart from that, you're also using our new technology to enchant and improve the products. You've even added in our wood spirits products. Today's opening has already been so popular. That's mostly because everyone has accumulated demand for Mother's store, which has been closed for so long. The new customers are probably here because they heard the news. I truly felt that Amelia should learn from her as I looked at the young financial expert in front of me who spoke so eloquently. With her help, in addition to my special products, perhaps this century-old store, which was known for its poor management, would be able to break into the Cloud Tower's top 10 in terms of sales this year and challenge the 1,000-year-old stores of the major organizations. Was it abnormal for a mage to open a store? It might seem that it was wrong for a financial expert to be obsessed with money, but sometimes there was a difference between reality and ideals. Since learning and researching new magic all required large amounts of money and resources, even a mountain of gold could be eaten up if one only spent money. Mags not only needed to learn how to earn money, but they also needed to learn how to spend money. Low-level mags had their own ways of earning money. They could copy magic scrolls and sell them, or they could work for mid-level or high-level mags. Their expenses weren't high, and that was enough. Meanwhile, top-level mags would spend several 100,000 gold coins on a single research project. If they failed, they would lose everything. If they didn't know how to manage their finances, they would sooner or later become someone like Amelia with negative assets. Actually, just like scientific researchers in a certain world, it was quite easy for mags' research results to be converted into shiny gold coins. They could enchant weapons and equipment, create cannon fodder tamed creatures, sell alchemy potions, research and development of new weapons and equipment, and convert various technologies to civilian use. These were all businesses that could easily earn money. For example, I knew that there was a certain magic guild called Darkball that had many summoning mags. They were especially skilled at taming magical beasts. Apart from selling all sorts of summoned beasts and contracted magical pets, their carriage business took up more than 70% of the market share. This was a long-term and permanent source of income for them. Mags who were skilled at enchantments would open enchantment shops. Alchemists wouldn't lack money, and they would be skilled at creating magical items and equipment. If you were an archmage who monopolized some type of technology or industry, you would basically be able to lie down and count your money. Even if you didn't know anything at all, you could still become a mercenary. Copying high-level magic scrolls would earn you quite a bit of money. As long as you worked a little harder and stopped your research to earn money when you ran out of money, you wouldn't starve to death. Alright then, I was going to insult Amelia again. She was the wielder of the emblem of endless truth, and she had monopolized the top-level plant-related magical technology. Yet, she had actually managed to survive to such an extent. But now that I had a little helper like Rosa, I didn't need to worry about my shop anymore. I had originally been worried that those bastards wouldn't be able to properly receive me. Now that I had nothing to worry about, I could focus my energy on product preparation, development, and so on. My goal had never been as simple as opening a shop to earn money. Chapter 299. Was the mage country really strong? The answer was obvious. Although the mage country was rated as a mega country, everyone knew that it wasn't a country at all. Instead, it was a gathering place for countless mags. Not to mention the countless low and mid-level mags, just the archmages who had received the emblem of endless truth. If all these top-level mags were to act together, alright then, everyone knew that this was basically impossible. After all, every mage had their own needs, goals in life, and research topics. It would be unthinkable to have them work together like a country for the sake of a common goal. This was also why the mage country had remained firmly rooted in the mage country for so many years. They lacked the need to expand their territory. Expand territory and population? What a joke. There were only so many mags. A single city would be enough to accommodate 90% of the population. Who would use the land if you expanded? You'd even need to hire people to grow crops and maintain public order. Increase the number of mags in the country by increasing the population? No need. We never cared about so-called nationalities, nor did we need a so-called population. As long as anyone was willing to abandon the boring lives of mortals and choose the path of seeking knowledge, they would be our comrades. An eternally neutral country, Arladanti. It wasn't that this country remained neutral. Instead, most of the mags in this country consciously chose to remain neutral as individuals. This neutrality didn't only include wars between countries, it also included the eternal holy war. They didn't have any good impressions of the order gods, but they also hated the chaos evil gods. It could be said that the order gods only believed in themselves and only pursued magic and the truth. They were the most likely third party in the holy war. Of course, since most mags were born human, it wouldn't be wrong for them to belong to the order faction. If they were asked to send troops to participate in the holy war, fine, they didn't have any troops. Mags who had things to worry about and were willing to participate in the holy war could do so by themselves. They're basically our natural allies. But just as I mentioned before, when the entire Truth Symposium was filled with academics who hated politics, forming an alliance was basically meaningless. An alliance that couldn't be carried out to the end was no different from a piece of scrap paper. Throughout history, there had been many ambitious schemers who wanted to borrow the mage country's great strength. However, they all failed. No matter how loud they shouted, there were still very few who responded. But if I had to say it, it was because their ideas were too old-fashioned. Common conspiracies such as forming alliances, inciting the populace, and colluding with those in power were completely meaningless against this country's abnormally disorderly organizational structure. Personally, I had some other opinions. Indeed, we couldn't ally with this country that was far too loosely organized. After all, even if we obtained the support of some of the truth overseers, those loosely organized mage organizations and individuals still wouldn't trust us. But if we thought about it from a different angle, we could easily bribe everyone. As long as we bribed enough mags, it would be the equivalent of having the entire mage country on our side. Sounds incredible. If there were too many of them, how could they be bribed individually? But it could actually be done. How do you make a neutral person suddenly become your staunch supporter? The answer was simple. Fill his wallet with your gold coins, or simply throw a valuable IOU into his hands, turning your two different interests into one. In that case, how could two different forces or even two countries come together? Actually, the answer wasn't that different. It would be fine as long as they shared the same interests. For example, they could use the same currency and the same language, and both sides would have zero tariffs. In many situations, their interests and standpoints wouldn't be separated, and they would naturally come together. In the history books of my previous world, many countries had used this exact method to merge two countries into one. There was also a certain emperor who used the same currency and dialects as the cornerstone of his unification. Alright, now that I mentioned it, I had come up with a method. As long as I fulfilled two conditions, I would be able to bribe everyone. First, make everyone share the same interests as me. Second, make them my customers, friends, and even creditors. If I could accomplish these two conditions and make them feel like they would suffer losses if they didn't support me, they would naturally join me. Originally, I had helplessly given up on this plan after only thinking about it for a bit. After all, the amount of capital and financial resources required would be astronomical. However, a sudden incident recently made it possible for me to buy over all the mags in the mage country. Justice points. Our top-level goods can only be bought and sold using justice points. And this is only the beginning. Our final goal is to have everyone in the mage country use justice points as the most important currency. I was confident that with my many years of accumulation and the many factions behind me, my goods and treasury would be more than enough to make all the mags go crazy. However, this was only the beginning. According to my plan, there would be more and more shops using justice points as payment in the future. My most important goal would still be to have most people in the mage country recognize justice points as the most valuable form of currency and actively participate in earning justice points. This way, we would naturally have countless powerful contract heroes. If an astonishing number of mags were willing to fight for justice points, the entire mage country would gradually become our ally. Of course, in order to achieve this goal, there would still be countless steps and tricks, such as how to make justice points the official currency, how to have all the shops and mags use justice points, and how to make all the mage organizations sit back and watch this happen. However, I had the patience and confidence to take things slowly. Neutral. You'll soon discover that there's no such thing as neutral in this war. This time, I definitely won't repeat the same mistakes. The mage country in the game's history wasn't any weaker than the current mage country. However, when faced with the changes in the world and how many lives were lost, the mage country still chose to ignore the unfolding of this holy war and simply record everything as a bystander. They were as neutral as ever. No, neutral couldn't even be used to describe them. They were proud, slow, and cold. In the past, the mage country had been able to ignore the Yongye calamity and other similar catastrophes that swept across the entire land. This time, they would naturally be able to do the same. Even though they were fighting to the death in the outside world, they still chose to live their normal lives in the Cloud Tower, discussing the newest technological inventions and the terrible weather that was becoming colder and colder. But when this war truly engulfed the entire world, they discovered that they had long since been caught in the crossfire. It was already the end of the world, and it was already too late to take action. Actually, in the game's history, it wasn't that there weren't any observant mags who gave warnings. It wasn't that there weren't any surveillance battles from other planes that pointed out the abnormal movements of the creatures from other planes. However, the various mage organizations had long since come to the conclusion that this was just another war between species that would last for 200 or 300 years. It was enough to just ignore it. The arrogant mags finally got a taste of their own medicine. When a Rockadant finally realized that something was wrong with the situation and truly ordered all the mags to mobilize, the entire land of Ike had already experienced countless battles. Countless powerful individuals from other planes had already arrived, and the river Styx was filled with the souls of the dead. Semigod lords were raising wine cups filled with blood in the face of the apocalypse. Demons and devils were forming armies under the leadership of the evil gods. What could the powerful mags possibly do? Sometimes, being neutral seems like the only correct choice. However, it's also the most passive choice, the farthest away from the correct choice. Although I didn't want to admit it, from a certain standpoint, the conflict between the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country was indeed a good thing. At the very least, the Bardi Empire told the high and mighty mags in their ivory towers that there was no such thing as complete peace in the world. Even if you stayed at home, it was possible that a bandit would suddenly break in and slap you in the face. I sincerely looked forward to the upcoming Truth Symposium. I wanted to see what the archmages who had just returned from the front lines would come up with. Also, that sudden forbidden spell ambush was something completely different from the Mage Country's traditions. Why did I feel like it was so sudden and incomprehensible? There was definitely something interesting that hadn't been revealed yet. What I needed to do now was to forcefully awaken the mags. Justice points and the secrets of magic would be the bait to drag the mags into the Truth Symposium. As long as the mags entered the Truth Symposium, they would have enough information to report back to the Truth Symposium about destruction and chaos. With the intelligence of the mage job class, how could they not notice that something was wrong? At that time, I would naturally gain more allies. Would it be difficult to lure them into the Truth Symposium? Would the mags have no desires? How could that be possible? I had always believed that the seemingly calm mags were actually the easiest job class to tempt. Greed Heloise was the most classic example of a mage. Her endless desire for the secrets of magic was the epitome of this job class. Soon, the new issue of Cloud Weekly was published. Apart from introducing Thorn Garden and our new products, there was also a list of ways to exchange justice points for justice points. On this list were the secrets of the gods from the immemorial era. These were all treasures that couldn't be obtained through any other method. Nothing would attract a mage's desire for knowledge and greed more than the unknown. This would definitely cause many people to immediately take action. My ultimate goal was to use this point to lead the entire mage country to be on guard and take action ahead of time. However, rice needed to be eaten one bite at a time, so there was no need to rush such an obvious scheme. In order to drag the mage country into this mess, I would first have to start with how to expand my Thorn Garden. The market for plant magic and its products would be limited. In order to attract the attention of the entire Cloud Tower, Amelia's foundation alone wouldn't be enough. I had already prepared my new products, so I could also make a huge profit. A mechanized mage army? That doesn't seem quite right. Archmage Andre was quite vexed. As the vice leader of the Sword of Order, he was responsible for taming the strongest magical pets. He had already left his cute laboratory for far too long. Those clumsy acolytes didn't even dare to approach his precious pets' cages. It was likely that one or two of his pets had already starved to death. I keep feeling like my precious pets are facing a threat that's even worse than starvation. How strange. Is there some sort of danger in the Cloud Tower? However, he knew that now wasn't the time to be thinking about such things when he saw the sandstorm and thick smoke before him, as well as the constant dragon roars in the distance. That forbidden spell had transformed this entire area into a living hell of lava. 2 squads of Bardi Dragon Knight, who were determined to take revenge, had already arrived. A surprise attack from 12 Dragon Knight would be quite difficult to defend against. However, this wasn't actually a big problem. After all, there were a total of 4 Truth Overseers here. If they worked together and forced the Bardi Dragon Knight to face them directly, the problem would likely be resolved very quickly. However, there was obviously another reason why both sides were in a stalemate. The Archmages of Arlo didn't want to continue escalating the battle. Even more so, they didn't want to offend the dragons behind the Dragon Knight by killing dragons. The Bardi Dragon Knight had also been acting rather strangely recently. They continued to patrol and ambush the Bardi Empire, but they lacked offensive power. Their largest dragon breath attack was only a single dragon breath attack that lit up several buildings. As the Bardi Empire was determined to take revenge, this was obviously far too mild. It feels like they're being restrained by something. They don't intend to escalate the battle. I don't understand. But soon, he didn't need to worry anymore, as he received a letter from the Cloud Tower. Chapter 300. Asterisk boom. 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 Asterisk on the streets of Arlo, the sound of explosions could be heard everywhere. Young mags rode on mechanical iron horses and chased each other, leaving behind a trail of chaos and black smoke. The steel wheels of the iron horses left numerous wheel tracks on the ancient streets. Young people cheered and laughed loudly as they enjoyed the passion of speed. Ladies' skirts fluttered in the wind as they cursed at each other. Black smoke rose up and blackened the police who heard the commotion. As for the angry roars behind their heads, there was no license plate number in this world for them to copy. Soon, as the knights' driving skills improved, new legends of speed were created. Riding on iron horses and chasing each other on the streets became the most fashionable form of entertainment for young mags. Street races. Causing as many traffic accidents in a single week as in the past year? Does that have anything to do with me? I'm just a legal merchant who does my job. If someone kills someone with a kitchen knife, are you going to arrest the shop owner who sells kitchen knives? Cher, who was in charge of the disciplinary team, was so angry that her veins popped out when she saw the young mage's nonchalant expression. However, there was nothing she could do. This was not the first time she had dealt with the master in front of her. Within a week, this master had actually come to the guard bureau to collect people 9 times. Although it was not a heinous crime, His group of subordinates constantly broke all kinds of records of how low the moral limit was, and how many new types of crimes they had committed. Especially that Draken who treated his prison cell as his home. He would report to the police station on time every day. She didn't know what he had done, but all the prisoners were frantically begging for help from the prison guards, requesting to be transferred to another cell. "Well, I think it's safer here." When she asked, that simple and honest Draken actually shivered. It seemed that he had offended many people. But when she checked the files, she actually discovered that he was a saint-rank beast tamer hunter. That meant that in less than a week, he had successfully offended myth-ranked and even semigod mags. As for the others, there were those who sold fake goods, streaked, made explosions, and fought and caused trouble. If it wasn't for the guarantee of the master in front of her, she would have long thrown them into jail. But today, Cher's patience had reached its limit. Perhaps his subordinates' moral character couldn't be equated to their own moral character. At the very least, it was true that he was embarrassed and depressed every time he came to pick up his subordinates. But when he came to pick up his subordinates again the next day, or even in the afternoon of the same day, not only did it make people doubt his sincerity that he would definitely take care of these bastards, but it also made people wonder if his subordinates were a professional criminal organization, or if they were simply here to cause trouble for the Security Bureau and the Discipline Inspection Department. However, this was only the tip of the iceberg that Thorn Garden had caused. The new Thorn Garden instantly became popular among female mags thanks to its cute elven employees. Even female mags who weren't interested in plant magic would enjoy afternoon tea at the forest cafe behind the store. Just watching these cute elves running around would be enough to kill an entire day. Of course, there were also male mags, especially some elderly mags with white hair, who wanted to sneak into Thorn Garden. However, most of them were unable to withstand the female mags' piercing gazes and quickly fled. While the female mags and acolytes treated Thorn Garden as a vacation spot, the boys soon received their new toy. Iron Horse No. 7 was the new toy that was constantly creating black smoke, noise, and traffic accidents in the streets and alleys. It was similar to the Goblin engineering rocket car, but it only had 2 wheels. The auxiliary wheels will cost more. While everyone was still wondering if such a toy would be able to run, the goblins who were acting as a demonstrator were already racing on the streets. At first, the mags thought that this was another strange and dangerous new toy created by the goblins, so they brought their snacks and prepared to watch the fireworks. However, to their astonishment, apart from the traffic accidents caused by driving mistakes, these iron horses actually didn't explode on their own. This didn't conform to goblin engineering at all. Soon, a young man who had quite a bit of wealth couldn't resist the temptation of this new toy and bought one for research. He then unraveled it in front of everyone, causing an uproar in the entire cloud tower. A super small energy pool. It's actually so stable. How is this possible? No, it's probably just a rechargeable circulating pool water. Who cares about the principles? It's fine as long as it works. It would seem that Master Hester and Master Diego's research direction was wrong. There's no need to generate new energy in a small energy pool at all. All it needs is to be able to store and recharge energy. Olivia's magic box was indeed a groundbreaking invention. The greatest flaw in engineering wasn't the unstable explosions from the very start. Rather, it was the lack of a stable and long-lasting energy source. Using a powerful magical creature's magic core as the energy source would not only be far too expensive, but once the magic core was used up, the magic core would become nothing more than a pile of scrap metal before a new energy source with similar stats could be obtained. But after I solved the problem of a stable energy source that could be mass-produced, metal mounts naturally came into being under my guidance and design. It was only to be expected that the mags would discover the crux of the problem so quickly. After all, just the research project of a small energy pool had 2 Divine Truths level mags competing against each other. However, it was obvious that they hadn't made much progress. After all, this technology had been wrong from the very start. Mags were no strangers to energy pools. Every mage tower would have their own large energy pool as backup mana reserves. The principles behind energy pools were different, and some could even draw energy from other dimensions. With the support of an energy pool, A high-level mage would be close to having unlimited mana in their own mage tower. It would be an understatement to say that their power level would increase by 3 times. Don't attack a mage's home. This was the most basic rule for any adventurer. Anyone who dared to violate this rule would basically be dead by now. Mags had always been researching ultra-small portable energy pools in order to increase their combat strength when traveling. However, they had either researched on the soul, natural phenomena, or alchemy. However, it was obvious that none of them had ever thought that engineering, which had nothing to do with magic, would come to such a conclusion. Based on Mag's current technology, even the smallest energy pool would be the size of a room. For a long period of time, any technology smaller than that would be considered impossible. After all, opening a stable exit to another dimension or drawing out a powerful energy lifeform would require quite a bit of space. From a certain standpoint, although mags were all scholars who pursued the truth, mags, scientists, and alchemists viewed things from a completely different perspective. There was no difference between mags and mags. Even the most basic magic of mags would go against the theoretical foundation of energy and matter conservation that engineers believed to be the foundational principles. Mags and mags would always walk 2 different paths. If one tried to compare them, it would be like comparing a chicken to a duck. Based on the principles of a large or medium-sized energy pool, mags would only consider how to obtain as much energy as possible in a small space and create a perpetual motion machine. They never considered that it would be enough to conserve energy and continuously recharge the energy pool. And when there was a problem with the direction of research and there was no corresponding theoretical foundation, obtaining results would be no different from winning the lottery. Research that had originally been thought to be impossible suddenly produced results. The top-level mage researchers' lifelong goal had been succeeded by the gnome's engineering. Now that the final product was right in front of everyone, even the calmest mage would be unable to accept it. Dismantle it. That's right, dismantle it. With the enthusiastic onlookers cheering him on, the owner of the car excitedly prepared to dismantle it on the spot. However, he discovered that it was covered in numerous seals. There was even a safety seal on the seal, which required the user to inject a specific magical wave into it in order to dismantle it. Of course, such a small matter wouldn't be a problem for mags. And so, with the assistance of an archmage beside him, this small seal was forcefully dismantled. And then, there was no then. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk actually, this wasn't much. Mags were quite skilled at all sorts of magical traps. After using magic to dismantle the trap, a numeric keypad would pop up, and the user would have to enter a password consisting of 20 numbers within 10 seconds. Even knowing the password would require a high hand speed. For mags who weren't very skilled, this was obviously quite difficult. Alright then, should I say that mags were already used to explosions during their research? Or perhaps Golden Tooth and the others still had some conscience? At the very least, this explosion didn't cause much damage to the energy pool. At the very least, no one died. But from a certain point of view, the mags were truly nouveau riche. When the news of the small energy source in the Iron Horse No. 7 spread, the expensive Iron Horse series was sold out in one afternoon, and then, explosions could be heard throughout the entire city. Before the sun even rose, Thorn Garden's entrance was filled with black people waiting in line to shop. Of course, with top-level mags helping out, the gnome's door locks wouldn't be able to stop them for long. It would only be a matter of time before such a technology would be dismantled. But this technology that was originally intended to be sold was also on the next list of products to be sold. When the mags were almost done dismantling it, it would be time for them to sell it for an astronomical price. Soon after, while the mags were busy with their research, they also tested out the armored motorcycles and discovered something else. So stable. So much more stable than horses. And so fast. From a certain standpoint, long-distance travel was definitely a tiring job for mags with weak constitutions. In their eyes, this new and interesting toy was far more comfortable and stable than horses. It wouldn't be a big deal if they only wanted to enjoy riding on it. We can actually cast spells while riding on them. Mags needed to be fully focused when casting spells. In fact, they would even enter a dazed state for a short period of time. It would be nearly impossible to cast spells while riding on a constantly jolting horse. However, the iron horse's stable movement on the streets attracted a lot of attention. Mags' greatest weakness was doubtlessly their slow and sluggish bodies. Once a mage got close to them, it would be incredibly difficult to increase the distance between them again and again. If they could cast spells while moving at high speed, their power levels would increase exponentially. But even for battle mags who specialized in combat, it would still be incredibly difficult to learn how to cast spells while moving. Their movement speed would also be incredibly slow. And if they cast spells while sitting on a horse carriage, the wooden wheels and bearings that had zero dampening ability would cause them to constantly move up and down. A single bump at a critical moment would result in a fatal spell backlash. Indeed, there was a type of mount that could allow people to cast spells while sitting on top of it, gigantic beasts like dragons. However, the difficulty of obtaining one was, for a time, it was viewed as impossible to cast spells while moving at high speed. However, it didn't seem that difficult to cast spells while sitting on an iron horse and riding on a sidecar. It was at that time that Thorn Garden published the slogan "Let those muscleheads forever eat our dust." As if to prove this slogan's meaning, magical swordsmen from the Northlands rode iron horse motorcycles on the streets. This perfectly displayed the motorcycle's excellent dampening ability, as well as the possibility of casting spells while moving at high speed. Only mags would understand the needs of mags. This seemingly inconspicuous toy could actually greatly increase a mage's survival rate in the wild. And so, the Iron Horse No. 7 became a stepping stone for mags to enter the market. Young mags swiftly learned how to drive motorcycles and quickly discarded the useless auxiliary wheels. They even started drag racing, which the public security officers hated so much. Meanwhile, the elderly mags spent money to hire drivers so that they could enjoy riding on the sidecar. For a time, "Have you bought one yet? How many have you bought?" became a common greeting among mags. There was always a long line of people waiting in front of Thorn Garden's entrance. But this was only the beginning. 2 days later, the number of people buying iron horses had become like fighting over each other. The daily quota of 100 iron horses would be sold out on the very first night. More importantly, Thorn Garden released a new advertisement saying that all these iron horses could only be purchased with justice points 1 month later. Justice points. I've already heard the previous announcement. It doesn't seem that difficult to obtain, but how can I obtain so many in such a short period of time? Doesn't that mean that these iron horses will only be sold for 1 month? The Iron Knight that had already been purchased would flaunt on the streets, increasing the competition. In fact, archmages would even be willing to sell their most precious treasures just for a single iron horse. Although a certain black-hearted merchant didn't do something so evil as to raise the price of the iron horse, he made a tremendous profit just by selling the iron horse's iron horse. This method of selling seemed to be quite effective. If there was anything more suitable than good quality and low price or interesting and novel, it would probably be limited sales, first come, first served, or limited sales for a limited time, out of print. Another reason for selling iron horses was the rapidly increasing number of street racing events. This caused Cher, who was the representative of the police department, as well as the disciplinary department, to feel a deep hatred for her. I actually felt a headache as I looked at the angry blue-haired girl in front of me. If possible, I didn't want to offend the government's public security department either. It should be mentioned that the Cloud Tower's public security department was divided into 2 departments. The first was the regular police department, which was responsible for law and order. The other was the internal disciplinary department, which was responsible for the various mage organizations. The former was responsible for both major and minor matters, but it was obvious that ordinary law enforcers wouldn't be able to control mags. The latter would use the name of the mage organizations to investigate and punish mags who crossed the line. Of course, since there were many overlapping responsibilities, the disciplinary department would be quite free whenever there weren't any mags in the organization they were in charge of. This was why many of the disciplinary department's mags would also work part-time in the police department. As for the mage organization I was looking at, not only was Cher Allen a law enforcer in the police department, she was also one of the high-level inspectors in the Mystical Blades disciplinary department. Her nicknames were Iron Girl and Iron Throat. Fine then, when the word iron was used on a lady, it was obvious that it wasn't a good word. At the very least, she was cold-faced and stubborn. But from a certain standpoint, this was the true portrayal of this overly serious female mage. Just from the fact that I had been constantly taking people away, I was beginning to understand that Cher was becoming more and more talkative. Her respect for me because of my status as an archmage had completely vanished. Every time she looked at me, I felt like she was looking at scum. And every time she watched me successfully take someone away, she seemed just like a hot-blooded police detective who would shout at the sly villain, "I'll definitely find evidence and send you to prison. Why did I mysteriously become the villain again?" Could it be that I really was the one who had been teleported to this world with a mocking face and a sinner? While I was still hesitating on what method I should use to trick this hot-blooded god detective into leaving, I heard sounds of arguing and explosions from the warehouse behind me. New trouble had arrived. Chapter 301. There was no such thing as a paradise without strife in this world, and there was no lack of idiots with no lower limit to their intelligence. Reality was often more surprising than fiction, because fiction had to pay attention to logic, but in reality, you would never be able to understand why someone could be so stupid, self-centered, immoral. The elderly mags all knew just how important the emblem of endless truth was. However, there were plenty of younger members of the royalty and major nobles among the new students. These new students could be said to be unbridled in their own territories. Not only that, when they were at the peak of their youth, they were discovered to have talent as mags, so they were sent to the Cloud Tower, where many geniuses gathered, to learn magic. They were just like the main protagonists of China's legendary novels. How could they possibly be mistreated? Of course, this cruel world would soon teach them a lesson and let them know their own weight. But in the process, there would already be victims. If he was lucky, he would naturally mature one day. However, the prerequisite was that he did not directly offend someone he could not afford to offend. Emblem of endless truth. Academic medal. What is that, Roland? Never heard of it. He's just a scholar-type mage who spends all his time in the lab, yet he dares not sell us our goods. My father master uncle is XXX. This was probably the thinking of those fools who came to the door. They often treated people politely at the beginning, but when they found that the other party did not give in, they began to throw money at them. When they found that the money was useless, they began to shout fiercely, and in the end, they would fly into a rage and threaten. This was undoubtedly the domineering style of the feudal tyrants. After that, Yoren would swing her Dragonslayer blade and teach them what it meant to be a mage's nemesis, an underground elf with full magic resistance. The Grey Elves' magic resistance was indeed not as good as the Dark Elves' era, but when faced against a bunch of rookies who had not even mastered two-circle magic, there was actually no difference. Of course, the young masters who were beaten to a pulp wouldn't give up so easily. What followed was all sorts of revenge and small troubles. In the past few days, we had actually met with 4 arsonists. This was also one of the reasons why the law enforcers behind me were eyeing me covetously. Not only did we break the record for causing trouble, we also broke the record for being reported to the police. Especially the few times when we were called to the police at 1 or 2 in the morning, it made the police and mags very annoyed. Who is it this time? Alright, judging from her explosive tone, it seemed like this female inspector had entered menopause in advance. 2 more, and we'll lose our public security award. It seemed like there was a more realistic reason. Great-grandson of Archmage Andre? The Sword of Order's vice-guild leader. This is going to be troublesome. But soon, her subordinate's report caused her to furrow her eyebrows. No matter what, the current Truth Overseer would definitely be difficult to deal with. Even if he wasn't currently in the Cloud Tower, the Sword of Order and Mystical Blade had a bad relationship to begin with. Back when the Mystical Blade and Sword of Order were named, they had been competing against each other. If she didn't handle this matter properly, it would be bad if it caused a conflict between the 2 mage organizations. Even though she had the moral bottom line of an enforcer, she knew that some things would be difficult to do. Her identity as a disciplinary inspector would be useful to the Mystical Blade's internal members. Even small and medium-sized mage organizations would pay for her, but the other mega-sized mage organizations wouldn't recognize her. And with just the power of the mystical blade's guards, it would be impossible for the mags to pay for her. Let me go. Do you know who I am? My granduncle is Adri. Even though Adri was tied up tightly, he still acted quite arrogantly despite having the appearance of a little monkey tied up. Apart from his arsonist accomplices, he was also tied up with various types of fuel and gunpowder. And most of his accomplices were second-generation noobs who didn't know how high the heavens were. Truth overseers had quite a bit of reputation. Normally speaking, in such a situation, the Truth Overseer's elders would be notified to strictly discipline the Truth Overseer. However, this Truth Overseer was a mage with 2 Truth Overseers. It would be difficult to say if the Truth Overseer would let this matter rest. Archmage Roland, although it was quite embarrassing, it was also part of Cher's job to suppress any potential danger. She still wanted to say something. However, the Truth Overseer who kept helplessly lowering his head and apologizing didn't even respond to her. Instead, he had a cold expression as he spoke with his head lowered. Yoren, Little Red 232, you're both injured. The dark-skinned elf shook her head, indicating that she was fine. However, there was a putrid smell coming from the knife wound on her arm. It was evident that the wound had been poisoned to such a degree just after being injured. However, judging from the healing effects of divine arts, it shouldn't be a big problem. Father, wah. My hair's all burnt. The little wood spirit jumped over to complain, but Roland only gently patted her head. Even Cher was quite annoyed when she saw the dejected little girl with a missing piece of her hair. Are there any losses? We discovered it in time, and the fire was quickly put out. The warehouse wasn't damaged at all, and Yoren was the most heavily injured of all of us. The place where the fire started was the kitchen, and the chefs we hired didn't have time to escape. Considering that they were going to open a restaurant, Thorngarden had hired several local chefs. It would seem that the chefs were only ordinary people who didn't manage to escape. Perhaps these second-generation noobs had even tried to kill them in order to silence them. According to Arladante's laws, what's the punishment for intentionally setting a fire that causes someone's death? Cher paused in surprise for a moment as she looked at Roland. Only then did she realize that she was a law enforcer. However, her usual smiling expression now had a rare hint of seriousness. According to Arladante's laws, the punishment should be hanging, but Roland's bright eyes suddenly dimmed. The next instant, they seemed like black holes that could devour everything. There was no anger, no hatred, just like an emotionless machine. Cher felt a chill down her spine when she was stared at by such a pair of eyes. She was no longer able to beg for mercy. Suddenly, she recalled that she had previously investigated Roland's background. However, her direct superior, who was viewed as a senile old artifact by all her colleagues, suddenly had a serious expression on his face as he warned her. There are some people and some things that are better off not knowing. If you want to survive, there are some lines that you absolutely shouldn't cross. To be honest, Cher was quite disappointed when she heard her former superior say such a thing. Roland only had 2 academic emblems on his chest, and he didn't have any other emblems of merit. He was so cowardly for acting so submissively to an ordinary law enforcer mage like her. Cher felt more and more that the higher-ups of the Cloud Tower weren't as simple as she thought. It was precisely because of Charlie's stubbornness in his colleagues' eyes that Roland's inconceivably punctual way of picking up people every day had become so successful. However, this also made Cher feel quite annoyed at this idiot who used backdoors to obtain the highest academic award. Today, when she saw Roland's ice-cold eyes staring at her, she felt as if she was a criminal who was being escorted to the judge's seat. She felt as if she was a frog that was being stared at by a snake, unable to move at all. Only now did she realize that she had been gravely mistaken. She had always treated a man-eating tiger as a tame house cat. Roland was definitely a mega dangerous individual. Oh, since the law says that it's hanging, then let's not bother the police department. Let's just hang them right here. Suddenly, Roland smiled, as if his previous mercilessness had been nothing more than an illusion. He was still the same kind man who always helplessly apologized. However, the words he said just now made Cher feel as if she was in a dream. Hang them? Hang them all? That's the descendants of more than 10 archmages. Even the vice leader of the Sword of Order is involved. How many mage organizations will we have to offend in one go? Wait a moment, my uncle. I apologize, I'll pay for the damages, you can't kill. Cher still hoped that Roland's words were nothing more than a threat. But soon, she discovered that Roland's words weren't just empty threats. His subordinates all took out lassos and tied them around the necks of the arsonists, dragging them out just like that. Meanwhile, pitiful screams kept coming from outside. After the screams reached a peak, everything returned to normal. When Cher hurriedly rushed out and saw the scene before her, she sucked in a cold breath. No matter if it was a tall centaur, a young knight, or a cute wood spirit, all of them executed the arsonists in a practiced and silent manner. With a simple pull of the lassos, the arsonists were hung up on trees. There was no pity or nonsense, as if this was just a normal daily routine. Hang them all at the entrance. Take the head of Andre's great-grandson to the Sword of Order's headquarters. Tell them that I'm waiting for Andre himself to come and collect his corpse. I didn't even bother to look at the grim-faced inspector as I kicked away the explosives. As expected, I found a black crystal and some dark green vials among them. Black core crystals. As long as they're ignited, this entire street will be destroyed. How ruthless. Twin snake venom. Anyone who comes into contact with it will instantly die. That's the one on Yoren's arm, isn't it? From the very start, I had never believed that these little brats would be a threat to me. But now, not only had they broken through my magical defenses, they had even injured Yoren, who was at the peak of gold rank. This was far beyond the capabilities of these pieces of trash. There had to be someone behind this. Their special status was obviously a test to see how I would react to their provocation, and to see if I was still the Yongye from back in the day. Since you want Yongye, I'll give him to you. Consequences? What's that? Can I eat it? My great-uncle is Andre? What a joke. Since when does a mere Andre dare to be so arrogant in front of me? I knew that this was both a test and an attempt to suppress me. If I showed weakness here, there would be even more trouble in the future. There's no need to even investigate their background. I'll just kill every single one of them. The next day, when Thorn Garden opened for business, it received its worst sales ever since its opening. The numerous Haruyuki dolls hanging on the walls and the wooden boards under their feet caused most of the customers who were originally here to stop in their tracks. However, it was quite the opposite. Some old fellows with medals hanging all over their chests paused in surprise for a moment, but then became quite happy that no one was fighting over their spots today. They smiled as they walked into the shop. As they walked, they even pointed at Thorn Garden as if they were looking at something interesting. Oh my, isn't that the little brat from the Harlin family? Ha, how unfortunate. He became cannon fodder for someone else. There's also that brat from the Andre family. Ha, there's going to be a good show to watch. What kind of good show to watch? Do you think that old bastard would dare to cause trouble with Roland? Besides, is it really worth risking his entire family's lives just for a great-grandson who's so many generations older than him? At most, he'll just yell a few words of courtesy. When Cher returned to the police station in a daze, she discovered that she had actually watched as a lynching took place. When she finally calmed down and prepared to gather more people to prevent even more trouble from occurring, old Charlie stopped her. Don't worry about it. We can't do anything with our measly strength. If he gets angry, nobody will be able to stop him. Cher was unable to remain silent this time as she recalled Roland's icy gaze. She instinctively felt that old Charlie was correct. As long as Roland wished for it, he would probably do anything. It was likely that nobody in the entire Cloud Tower would be able to stop him. Cher could faintly sense that Roland, who always had a cheeky smile on his face, had a ruler in his heart. As long as someone didn't cross his bottom line, he would be able to thicken his skin and smile as he led those troublemaking bastards around. But if anyone crossed that line, he would unhesitatingly kill them even if they were the emperor of an entire country. Just who is he? Why are you all so afraid of him? Cher had asked this question many times already. By now, Cher was no longer satisfied with her previous perfunctory answers. If old Charlie was already giving her perfunctory answers, she was even intending to go to the Mystical Blades headquarters and ask the various guild leaders. Many inquiring gazes landed on old Charlie, but he still remained silent. After a while, he took out his smoking pipe, lit it, and took a deep puff. "He's probably the most dangerous mage in the entire Cloud Tower. No, it's not wrong to say that he's the most dangerous mage in the entire world. It's not convenient for me to tell you, but you can go home and ask anyone over 100 years old. They should all know that you can't afford to provoke that man." Archmage Andri, who just returned to the Cloud Tower, angrily ran over to Thorn Garden. This sudden news caused the police station to be in an uproar once again. This time, old Charlie didn't stop Andri. When the police hurriedly arrived, they saw an inconceivable scene. The semigod Archmage Andri was actually being berated by a young mage in front of Thorn Garden's main entrance. Andri couldn't help but lower his head and apologize. As for Roland himself, this was only the beginning of today's biggest trouble. Berating a junior that he was friends with in the past for casually stepping into a trap was nothing much. However, Roland himself, who was at the very bottom of the rankings and had failed countless subjects, was actually going to become a teacher? This was the most troublesome part. Chapter 302. The Talon Tower was one of the lower levels of the mega magic organization, the Mystical Blade. Their standards for selecting students were quite high. Ordinary magic academies only required students to be at least 20 years old to be a one-circle mage. However, the Talon Tower required students to be at least 18 years old to be a two-circle mage. Although it didn't seem like much of a difference only 2 years less than one circle earlier, it just so happened that those 2 years were the golden period for growth. Even without those 2 years, one would still need to be a one-circle mage, and that was the boundary between the iron rank and the bronze rank. The difference would be like the difference between heaven and earth. It could be said that any student who reached the Talon Tower standards would still be considered a top student in any other magic academy's second or third year. Even with such high standards, the number of students applying each year would still far exceed the number of students accepted. The Talon Tower could only select the best over the best, and those who managed to enter would be far above the standard. They would either be geniuses or monstrous geniuses. Of course, the greater the investment, the greater the benefits. The Talon Tower's standards were set high, and it was able to attract so many people to join of their own volition. Naturally, the Talon Tower had an advantage over other magic academies. There was no need to mention the teachers, equipment, library, and so on. The Talon Tower's standards weren't that different from other magic academies. However, the Talon Tower's greatest advantage over other magic academies was that not only would archmages occasionally come to pick apprentices, top-level mags from the Mystical Blade would also come to teach at regular intervals. The top-level mags with the emblem of Endless Truth's Talon Tower would teach at regular intervals, and the students would have to show their true abilities. Not just the students, even the academy's teachers would try their best to find an opportunity to attend the Talon Tower's classes. For the students, this was an extra reward for the excellent. That was why only students who were above average in all aspects could attend the Talon Tower's classes with the teacher's permission. That was also why the Talon Tower Magic Academy's monthly classes were no different from a festival. If the teacher's class was good, there would likely be discussions about it all the way until the next class. Of course, due to the fact that the average quality of the teacher was extremely high, the quality of the teaching would not be bad. However, the problem was that some masters found it troublesome and would directly throw out their latest research results and harp on it. Perhaps they would gain something from their own summary, and a very small number of geniuses would also benefit greatly from it. However, for 99% of the rookies, they would definitely not understand. That was why the quality of the class and how much the audience would learn wouldn't depend on the teacher's skill level or the audience's skill level. The difference would be too great. Rather, it depended on whether the teacher had prepared the class for the audience to understand. To me, this was a problem that was neither too big nor too small. The Mystical Blade's internal rules were quite loose to begin with, and there were quite a few top-level mags as well. It was likely that I wouldn't be able to receive a lecture from them in just a few short years. It was likely that a certain kind-hearted person was acting up out of kindness, giving me a chance to promote myself and speed up my integration with the Mystical Blade. This is indeed a good thing, but the problem is that I don't know what to say. Although I was indeed a rare recipient of 2 emblems of truth, and based on my past history, this honor was well deserved. There was really nothing much to say about it. Talk about frost magic. According to the traditional research method of increasing my power level by level, I could only be considered a 3rd circle mage, bronze peak. Most of them were more like magical beasts with natural talent magic. They would naturally grow through instinct and actual combat. Of course, I could explain the foundational magic that I obtained from the snowy mountain, but the problem was that ordinary humans would never be able to learn it even if they understood it. It would be a waste of time to explain it. What about the high-level research results of ice and snow magic? My own original research results. No matter if it was frigid winter earth or ice eon, although they were both top-ranked magical masterpieces in the past century, they were obviously beyond the comprehension of mortals. I didn't intend to give others the chance to analyze my trump cards. As for undead magic, it wasn't that I couldn't teach them, and I was willing to teach them. But the problem was that undead magic would forever be grey in nature. Even the Sword of Order wouldn't teach such forbidden magic in public. And if I insisted on teaching these novices how to dissect corpses or how to create abominations, it was likely that everyone would look at me in a strange way. This is the problem of not being a professional. I clearly have a lot of knowledge, but it's so difficult to tell them. But after thinking about it for a while, I came to a decision. Since regular lectures are meaningless, then let's talk about something unconventional. Perfect timing. It's about time I tossed out a lot of words. From the outside, Talon Tower's lecture hall didn't seem large. But when I walked in, I discovered that it was a large area that had been expanded by spatial magic. This was a gigantic auditorium that could hold 500 to 600 people. Magical lights at the top of the auditorium illuminated the beautiful marble tiles, making the auditorium seem even more extravagant. The stair seats were already filled with people. Just like usual, 10 minutes before the lecture began, the auditorium was already filled with spectators. But unlike usual, this time, not only were there students, but there were also many white-bearded old men and professors who seemed young but were actually countless years old. The first row was actually filled with veteran mags. The most inconceivable part was that there were even several mags who were at the level of emblematic truths. This was normally quite rare. After all, even if these old mags were able to obtain the right to listen to my lecture, they were already top-level experts in their own research fields. Even if they were willing to lower their pride and listen to a lecture from someone of the same generation, it would be quite difficult for them to learn anything from this lecture that was aimed at novices. If their research fields really overlapped, and they needed any information or magical knowledge, it would be far better to directly exchange information with the person in question. There would be no need to owe anyone any favors. It would seem that the unknown Archmage Roland is quite amazing. None of the acolytes who were able to enter Talon Tower were idiots. Just by seeing this scene, they knew that this Archmage that they had never heard of before was obviously no ordinary person. And the few that learned of his identity from their elders and teachers were even more expectant of this Archmage's teachings. Of course, due to the fact that Roland's name played the role of a demon king in children's bedtime stories, as well as the fear that came with it, these people who knew all chose to sit in the back row near the door. Oh my, fortunately, I didn't intend on just casually trying to fool everyone. The moment I entered the lecture hall, I was shocked to see such a scene. It would seem that I had still underestimated how important the name Yungia was to mags. As I looked around, I saw Cade and his acolytes, Oslo Wen, Aloso, and many other old acquaintances from the mystical blade were all here. Even that old fool Anglo is here, and there's actually someone glaring at me. Oh, so it's that little girl Cher. She probably already knows my true identity, yet she still dares to glare at me. She's surprisingly courageous. But when I walked up to the podium, all these unnecessary thoughts became unnecessary. What I wanted to say had long since been buried in my heart. I raised my highlighter pen and hesitated for a moment before finally writing a few words on the podium. Revolution, a new era for mortals. Where should I start? Should I start with everything that happened in the underground? Or should I start with the rising elemental tide in the entire world? Or should I start with the impending Armageddon? Or should I start with the secrets of the gods? Compared to my peers who hid in their ivory towers, I had already experienced far too much, to the point where I didn't know where to start. Just now, I still didn't know where to start. But now that this topic that represented revolution was brought up, I had far too many random thoughts in my mind, so I didn't even know where to start. Since there are far too many random thoughts, I'll just casually talk about it. I'll say whatever I want. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask, but I might not answer. This first sentence made most people feel that this teacher of mine was unreliable. The holy war is already upon us. I'm afraid that everyone hasn't experienced it yet. Yep, I should say that you're not interested. After all, we mags are used to being bystanders. But, I'm afraid that the situation this time is quite special. It's basically impossible to be bystanders. The moment I said this, many people frowned in displeasure. Could it be that this teacher of mine was from the pro-war faction? But, this was a purely academic lecture. Wasn't it a little inappropriate for him to talk about politics? But, I laughed when I saw this situation. From a certain standpoint, these archmages of the Cloud Tower had been secluded for far too long. They probably didn't even notice the recent changes. No, perhaps they had learned about the latest news from certain sources, but they didn't feel that it had anything to do with them. What I want to discuss isn't the annoying politics, but the era that we must face. Everyone can see the growth of the elemental tide. Leveling up and research has become much easier. But, this is only the beginning. I pointed out with my finger, and a silver light of order illuminated the entire auditorium. This was a divine light that represented law and justice, as well as a new type of power. The power of law is a new power of order obtained through understanding of law and judging crimes. This is also my greatest achievement in the underground. Perhaps many people have already heard of it, but most people probably treat it as another form of the power of holy light. Not many people know that this power is actually quite suitable for mags. That's because this power was originally created by mags. Before I even finished speaking, I caused an uproar in the auditorium. Although the god of law had been a hot topic recently, the power of law had only just begun. Just because of its identity as the power of order, most mags viewed it as a power of order similar to holy light, which was far too much of a waste. As one of the creators of this power, I can guarantee that this is indeed the most suitable power for mags. The foundational structure of this power is law magic, as well as the belief and understanding of law itself. Perhaps other job classes will be able to use this power as well, but when it comes to logical thinking and comprehension abilities, which job class can compare to us mags? Furthermore, there are basically no requirements on the user's ability to control the elements and magic. The threshold for entry is quite low. Some things were left unsaid. When I mentioned that there was no requirement on the user's ability to control the elements and magic, the auditorium was in an uproar. Sensing the elements and controlling magic were the most basic requirements for a mage. If these were lost, wouldn't that mean that any youngster with a certain level of intelligence would be able to use the power of law? That's right, this was the reason why I had always believed that only the power of law could fundamentally change the world. It was probably the most basic supernatural power. And in order to maintain this power, one must follow the teachings and instructions of law. Not only must one abide by the law, one must also enforce the law for the sake of justice. And when the number of powerful law mags increases, when the vast majority of crimes are judged fairly, certain things and rules in this world will naturally change. That's right, this era belongs to mortals. As the god of law leveled up and countless law job classes worked hard, more and more law incantations were invented. I believed that it wouldn't be long before law incantators, the advanced job class for mags, became the third foundational job class after Justice Knight and Judge. And at that time, becoming a mage wouldn't be as difficult as it was now. Mags would definitely be able to step down from their divine pedestals. And this was only the beginning. Since I wanted to start a prairie fire, it would be quite easy to extinguish a single flame. That was why I simultaneously ignited several flames. You've probably already heard about the successful development of the small-scale energy source Olivia's magic box, but you probably don't know that the intellectual who successfully solved this core problem is the young alchemist Olivia from the Northlands. She comes from Rhodes, a small country in the north that most of you probably don't know about. Or, you might even think of it as a country of barbarians. And she, this little barbarian girl from the Northlands, is only 17 years old this year, yet she has already invented this creation that is destined to change the world. Facts spoke louder than words. The easiest way to beat down the arrogance and complacency of arrogant and unruly youths was to see the achievements of their peers. But what I wanted to say wasn't just the surface. Even though Olivia didn't have any achievements in the future, she was already destined to be recorded in history as the inventor of the small-scale energy source. I'm currently using the results of this research to submit the emblem of endless truth in the field of alchemy to the Truth Symposium. It's highly likely that Olivia will become the youngest mage in the history of the Truth Symposium. The moment I said this, everyone below the podium started discussing amongst themselves. Negative comments like she's not qualified, too rushed, and so on came out. However, some of the older mags nodded slightly in agreement. They had already seen through the true meaning of this invention. Perhaps some of you have already thought about how the creation of the Olivia's magic box would allow lone mags to have backup mana reserves. But, you never imagined that its greater use would be to allow mortals without any talent in magic to try and learn magic. That's impossible. This is blasphemy. The god of magic. How is this possible? The podium was already filled with exclamations of shock. Mags were proud to be mags. How could they easily believe that an ordinary person had invaded their domain? But, facts spoke louder than words. Soon, the memory crystal that had been prepared beforehand started playing a video. It was the first time that the Silver Cross Legion, composed of the 4 elemental swordcasters, had appeared on the battlefield in the Northlands for the first time. The wind blades flew in an orderly fashion, and the wind blades were launched in an orderly manner, like fireballs being thrown in a toss performance. Even the elite wizards in front of him exclaimed in shock and trembled at the might and elegance of the spellcaster group. Of course, they're still quite immature. But, some things are the hardest to learn at the beginning. Even semigod mags start off with first circle arcane spells. As long as they persist, the mags will become more than 10 times stronger than they are now. That's why I say that this is an era of change. This is an era that belongs to mortals. Chapter 303. Looking back at the past, if I were to list everything I had done and what I was about to do, perhaps I could easily see a clear main goal to increase the power of the entire world's mortals. Did this world lack powerful individuals? I didn't think so. Not to mention how many top-level mags in the Cloud Tower were rotting away in their research labs, there were countless dragons, giants, and hidden powerful individuals. Even Emperor Yongye back in the day was only ranked in the 30s among those who often caused trouble. This world was huge, and there were many powerful individuals. But could they become the power to change the world? The answer was obviously no. There were far too many coincidences that couldn't be repeated, and a large amount of time and resources would be required. The number of such individuals would forever be limited. And with the changes of the entire generation, it was impossible to count on a small number of individuals or small groups to change the overall situation. This was something I had learned from my past failures. The most annoying part was that these hidden individuals had incredibly high opinions of themselves. Just like the archmages of the Cloud Tower, they viewed the Holy War as nothing more than a passing cloud. By the time they realized that the situation was special and that they couldn't escape, it would be far too late. Powerful individuals are rare. Chosen ones. It was just that most people didn't even have a way to become stronger. Do you want to become a top-level powerful individual favored by the heavens? Heh, as long as I increase the number of foundational warriors, miracles and whatnot will naturally come. Geniuses and whatnot will be easier to deal with. Aren't they also geniuses who surpass 99% of their peers? Perhaps I can't increase the 1% that has too many coincidences, but as long as I increase the 99%, that means that the number of foundational warriors will increase by 10 times, and geniuses and whatnot will naturally increase exponentially. If this world that was destined to face countless fatal trials was a lone boat before a storm, then, before the raging waves of the future arrived, the most fundamental ballast stone was to desperately strengthen the weight of the boat. That was the foundation to withstand the storm. I would increase the power level of the majority of ordinary people in this world, and then use my authority behind the scenes, law and justice points, to guide them. This would reduce internal conflicts as much as possible, and increase the world's ability to resist the storm. This was my choice. The appearance of the power of law and the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers brought about by Olivia's magic box gave ordinary people the possibility of reaching the peak. However, this was only the beginning. Beneath the half-joking name of the Great Industrial Party was a tremendous ambition to change the entire world. I took a deep breath. What I was about to say next was the most important point of my speech. The small energy pool Olivia's magic box has far more uses than that. Its greatest beneficiary is definitely not spellcasters. Perhaps some of you have already tried Iron Horse, haven't you? What do you think? How about the war horses? Ignoring the commotion below the stage, the conclusion had probably appeared long ago. War horses are very expensive. Their breed and bloodline are both big problems. Furthermore, the nurturing period is very long, and they also need a complete set of equipment. It could be said that a fully armored warhorse was equivalent to half a knight's life. Not to mention, warhorses required the highest quality of food and fodder, which was why the lords of various regions were willing to risk their lives in order to maintain a sufficient number of knights. And these iron horses. Some of the nobles in the audience had already guessed what I was going to say. It's cheap, really cheap. Compared to warhorses, the cost was not high. It only required some engineering materials and did not require any special magic materials. It could be easily mass-produced. In terms of performance, even with the current technology, before the energy was used up, it was still better than a warhorse with a full body armor. The body of the iron horse can also be stacked with armor. Its defensive capabilities are even stronger than a physical body. I closed my eyes, but I felt as if I had already traveled through the river of time. On the battlefield of the future, these Iron Knight wielded lances and dwarven muskets as they attacked the invaders at lightning speed. And they were only a part of this iron army. This is only the beginning. I can tell you that self-propelled super small mechanical armor has already been successfully developed. It can greatly increase an individual's combat strength and survivability. Also, heavy tanks that can rival the mammoth war elephants are currently being researched. Large Titan armor and war machines that can be steadily mass-produced are also being produced. Very soon, the engineering that you all ignored will go from being a laughable little toy to a path of truth that can rival magic. And the people who control them will be mere mortals that you all look down on. Perhaps the mortals of the future will be even more powerful than you all expect. In other words, the flow of history is unstoppable. Heroes would be born in response to the times, and revolutions would occur in response to the tides. Even without me, the magical engineering revolution was destined to occur. In that history, when the Armageddon arrived, the Ottoman Empire had already suffered several serious blows and was in dire straits. They finally gave up the technology for small batteries that were destined to change the world. What followed was a revolution in magical engineering. Although there were many detours later on, the final product of magical engineering still changed the world, changing people's lifestyles and fighting styles. It even changed the entire civilization of the Asia continent. But since I was here, how could I possibly delay the most precious time to prepare for war? Thanks to the butterfly effect I caused, Olivia's invention of this core technology was already more than 10 years ahead of history. Timlad also didn't need to waste so much time to grow. And, with my experience as a guide, he was able to avoid many wrong research directions and take fewer detours. No, just the memories of modern warfare in my mind were enough to bring forward the evolution of engineering by thousands of years. Sometimes, even a small improvement would require countless years of hard work and battle experience. The most obvious example was how tanks had been modified from agricultural tractors back in the day. Did World War I's popular barbed wire entanglements, trenches, and machine gun bunkers no longer work in this world? Perhaps a small trench and some defensive facilities, along with a few mortals stationed there, would be enough for an entire army of knights to sacrifice countless lives to defend it. In the next generation, it'll be hundreds of times easier to obtain power than it is now. Even ordinary people will be able to kill powerful individuals. Revolution. This is no longer a simple invention. This is a new industrial revolution. This is the goal of our great industrial party. That's right, heroes would be born in troubled times. It was as if this world instinctively refused to accept the fact that it was about to perish. Soon, new technology, new magic, and new powerful individuals would appear like mushrooms after the rain. As the enemies of the world became stronger and stronger, the native residents of this world would also become insanely powerful. And what I needed to do now was to start an industrial revolution in this magical fantasy world, providing sufficient soil and foundation for this revolution. Perhaps some people might wonder if such a revolution is necessary, or if it's necessary to stop it. What I'm about to show everyone is some real information. There are prophecies as well as current events. I can vouch for the veracity of this information with my own name. I took a deep breath. There were some things that needed to be revealed. You all still want to be cowards? Let's see how you're going to cower when others are already at your doorstep. And so, the information that had been broadcasted on the Borealis back in the day was once again shown to the world. It was almost like a prophecy. Hordes of demons walked the streets, burning cities groaned in pain under the Black Knight's iron hooves, the undead invaded the living's territory, the elves' holy lands became nothing more than abandoned craters, and lava covered the land of ice and snow. The most shocking part was still the ancient ruins. There was a damaged tower that shone with the light of an arcane spell, which doubtlessly indicated that this was the current prosperous Cloud Tower. At the same time, my memory crystal also displayed the scenes of recent battles. The Underground's demon armies invaded, the Northland's ferocious beastmen attacked cities, the undead calamity invaded Aishi, the clash of forbidden spells that died midway, the Ottoman Empire's Rain City, the Earth Elemental Plains Earth Elemental Lords and Divine Sins. Every single battle was difficult to deal with, and every single battle was fought to the very last moment. While the entire world was quietly changing, and epic battles were constantly happening in the outside world, the mags in the clouds were still living in their own world. The information about these battles would at most become a topic of idle chatter before and after meals. No matter how intense someone else's war was, it would only cause some exclamations. Perhaps they might feel something at the time, but they would soon forget about it. However, seeing things directly was different from reading words on paper. Scenes after scenes of the Armageddon from the future intersected with scenes of war in reality. Reality and fables were placed together, and the god's declaration from not too long ago seemed to echo in everyone's ears. Even the most confident person would have to carefully consider just how far this holy war would develop, and whether or not they would be able to safely stay out of it as they expected. Facts spoke louder than words, so I didn't waste any more words. Now, it was time for me to answer my questions. How did these scenes in the prophecy come about? Prophecy magic can't possibly produce such results. Not only that, prophecy magic can no longer produce results. Also, when did you learn about these prophecies? As the highest-ranked member of the Mystical Blade, Oslo Wen had to ask this question. As for me, I had long since expected such a question. In fact, I had even prepared an answer for it. Origin? You could say that it was a coincidence, but I can guarantee in the name of the Holy Light that this is definitely the truest history and future of this world. This is the truth that will definitely happen if I don't interfere. From a certain standpoint, my identity as a user of Holy Light was quite helpful to me. At the very least, it was quite convincing when I said such a truest lie oath. As for when I learned about this, would you believe me if I told you that I learned about this 300 years ago? Yes, I swear in the name of the Holy Light that 370 years ago, when I was still a 7 or 8-year-old child, I already knew that all of this was destined to happen. The glorious holy light on my finger proved the veracity of my oath. The entire auditorium was in utter chaos. As for me, it was already time for me to retreat. Fine then, there wasn't much to say. It was likely that I would expose myself if I said any more. There's another truth behind the Yungyea calamity. The history textbooks should have been rewritten long ago. A slandered hero of darkness? A sole survivor of the Armageddon? A madman driven insane by despair? A true prince of the Northlands. Using the latest research data to prove the veracity of the Armageddon Prophesies interview with Archmage Finthron from another dimension, I was truly impressed by the professionalism of a journalist from another dimension as I looked at the stacks of extra editions and additional editions on my desk. I didn't even know that I had done so many things in secret. I had become a tragic hero who had to save the world despite being slandered by the Holy Light. TSK, TSK, TSK. This article even talks about your past love history. You actually had 2 lovers and a concubine. It's so believable. Roland, did you take revenge on the Holy Church because your lover died? The black cat skillfully flipped through the pages of the newspaper with its paws as it searched for new jokes. After it finished laughing, it even licked some milk to quench its thirst. It was becoming more and more like a real cat. H. I was only 14 years old when I died. Do you think anyone would believe such a thing? Making a public declaration was quite valuable. That afternoon, all the major organizations learned about the contents of my declaration. Meanwhile, although it was almost an open secret that Roland was the Emperor of Yungia, there was still no mention of Yungia in the newspapers and magazines sold to the public. However, all the major organizations' internal publications were already filled with all sorts of guesses and rumors. What was slightly worth rejoicing about was the fact that the various organizations didn't want to touch our sensitive nerves. At the very least, the current trend of news reports was rather acceptable. Although it felt rather strange to mysteriously become a hero of the dark side, it was still much better than mysteriously becoming a scapegoat in the past. After I revealed the truth, if the major organizations wanted to cooperate with me and obtain even more benefits, they would naturally have to help me advertise my existence. As for killing this new technology that was still in its infancy, forcefully stealing it, not to mention the fact that it was basically impossible to accomplish, sometimes I even felt proud of my notoriety. It was such an incredible reputation. The only side effect was that today's business reached a new low. Is it still the same outside? Yep, there are many people outside your shop, but very few of them come in to shop. They're all old friends who are at the level of a teacher. It seems that all the new customers today are here for you. Aren't you going to greet them? Forget it. When I went out for some exercise this morning, I scared away several dozen customers and even fainted a few. I feel like I've become a Medusa. Everyone I see is petrified, and everyone collapses when I stare at them. There's even the sound effect of ghosts wailing and wolves howling. Why don't you talk about those girls who were enchanted by the story of a tragic hero? The first love letter in your life feels pretty good, doesn't it? Me. It's not the first. Fine, don't look at me like that. I admit that in my memory, it's the first love letter, alright? Still, I've received many dueling letters, curse letters, and Dear John letters in the past. Perhaps someone accidentally mailed the letter to the wrong person, or wrote the wrong name on the cover, or a girl was too embarrassed to write the wrong name and didn't send it to me. Why was it that the more I talked about it, the sadder I felt? Let's talk about something more interesting. That person outside is still squatting there. Yep, she said that as an honorable law enforcer, she absolutely has to keep an eye on you. She told her, don't even think about doing anything evil in this city. Heloise even imitated that damned girl's tone of speech. It felt quite similar. At the very least, it was quite obvious that she was gnashing her teeth and not letting me have an easy time. I glanced outside the window at the female maid Cher and her security team under a tree. I could only helplessly shake my head. At any rate, I didn't intend on doing anything illegal for the time being. If she wanted to squat here, then let her. If she wants to be a vigilante, then let her be. She still has enough money left to hire a security guard. Yep, that was indeed what I was thinking. From a certain standpoint, the existence of a vigilante department would make customers feel more at ease. I think that you should think of a way to ask her to leave as soon as possible. Why? It's not like I intend on doing anything illegal. It's only been one morning, and she's already raided 3 times. What's there to be afraid of? It's not like I have a guilty conscience. Just let her do whatever she wants. She's using the excuse of searching for taxes. She'll seriously look through the accounts every time. Are you certain that you're fake accounts? I'll immediately think of a way to make her leave. Chapter 304. Due to the fact that I had given a very impressive speech that day, my speech had been very successful and attracted countless gazes. The very next day, my great industrial party's headquarters had countless applicants, and it instantly became one of the top organizations in the Cloud Tower. Of course, that was impossible. Reality would always develop in the opposite of what one would expect. Even though the advertisements for the great industrial party were everywhere, there were still 0 applicants yesterday afternoon. Perhaps it was because the mags were as cautious as usual, or perhaps it was because the great industrial party's past notoriety left too deep an impression on people. However, there was now an unwelcome additional supervisor who took the initiative to visit us. I'll keep an eye on you. Don't misunderstand, this wasn't a confession of love. This was a police officer's righteous roar at a suspect. She was determined to punish the criminal no matter the cost. And so, the great industrial party, which had very few members, actually gained a permanent internal supervisor. This was a treatment that only large organizations with more than 1,000 members could receive. Since we were a subordinate organization of the Mystical Blade, it was impossible for us to refuse the great industrial party supervisor. And now, the mage organization Great Industrial Party. Fine, I knew that this sounded quite awkward. Yep, the only business under this great industrial party was this Thorn Garden shop, which was why she kept checking the accounts every day. How could that be? As a qualified businessman who pursued profit as his goal, which was destined to be illegal, he would need at least 3 sets of account books. One set was for people to check after paying taxes, one set was for himself to read, and one set was for when he was forced to give up his pawn to save his riches. According to the Mage Country's laws, the Mage Country could levy a 10% tax on any transaction within the country. This was quite a hefty tax, and it was common for private transactions to be done very carefully to avoid taxes. We were quite good at making fake accounts, but, what? She took the workshop's order and compared it to our inventory, and directly checked the amount that wasn't in our warehouse? That's completely against the most basic tax laws. Do you really think that fake accounts are legal? Of course. Is there any merchant in the world who doesn't fake account? At the very least, the royalty doesn't need to. Heloise thought about it for a long while, but she still couldn't remember a single merchant in her long life who didn't fake accounts. In the end, she hesitantly told me what she remembered. At the very least, back when she was still a princess, the royalty's subordinate merchants seemed to be quite honest. That's because they don't need to pay taxes at all. The tax will also go into their pockets as a subsidy. My angry roar echoed in the room. No matter which world I was in, a state-owned enterprise or a government background was a good way to earn money. In terms of taxes, financing, credit, and so on, it was definitely not something that an independent private company could compare to. But that was not the point. There are 12 types of goods that aren't on the tax return list, and there are at least 400 transactions that aren't recorded in the account book. In less than a week, he has evaded more than 50,000 gold coins in taxes. The false accounting is flawless, and there are no flaws on the paper. I even suspect that he was born into a merchant family. Looking at the unpaid taxes of 52,452 gold coins on the form, there was also an expected fine of more than 20,000 gold coins. My heart was bleeding. This was all my hard-earned money. Big mistake. TMPH, are you indirectly praising your inspection ability? This was the most advanced accounting technique in the world. Unfortunately, I was still exposed. If I had known earlier that she would go crazy and check the inventory for an entire day, I would have long since turned hostile and refused to let her in. No, I'm telling the truth. Although your accounting form is simple, the mathematical skills involved are probably far beyond the level of an ordinary mage. I'm even beginning to suspect that you're a professional counterfeiter. That's precisely why I had to use unconventional methods in order to discover your problem. So you're saying that I'm investigating you not because there's a problem with you, but rather because there's definitely a problem with you, so no matter what, I'm going to investigate to the end. Do you know that you're violating the most basic code of conduct for law enforcers, presumption of innocence? Even though Cher had a blank expression and didn't seem to know anything about this, and even though this didn't have much to do with me, I still mysteriously felt displeased to see a law enforcer acting so recklessly, causing me to keep a stern expression. Crack. What surprised me was that Cher directly tore apart the tax return form and instantly threw it everywhere. The next instant, the ground was covered in shredded paper. I didn't intend to threaten you. I just wanted to ask you something. Please answer me honestly. What is it? Since she had spent the entire day trying to find out what hurt me, what she wanted to ask would definitely not be a small matter. However, the most important thing right now was, why are you still standing there in a daze? Hurry up and help me destroy the evidence and repack the warehouse. Also, mess up the order of the goods and redo the accounting. If I get caught again, I'll deduct the fine from your wages. Yep, I should first take care of the aftermath in order to avoid being caught again in the same situation. As for Cher's condescending expression, I ignored it. And then, since you're asking so sincerely, I'll listen to you. After hesitating for quite a while, Cher grit her teeth and finally asked, "Are you my biological grandfather?" Fut. The tea in the mouths of the spectators turned into fountains. Even the silly cat knocked over her milk bowl. I was so scared that my soul almost left my body. Just what was going on here? Due to a certain female mage's astonishing revelation, everyone was thrown into a complete mess. It took 10 minutes for the room to be cleaned up. During this entire process, my mind was completely blank. Damn it, did someone come to my door and ask for alimony? Or was I being blackmailed? Why did someone suddenly hug my leg and call me father? I didn't participate in any elections. This doesn't seem right. I don't even have a wife, so why did a granddaughter suddenly pop up? Cher Aaron, human, at least in appearance, gold rank. Her exact age was unknown. She was born as a rogue mage and specialized in prophecy and runic magic. If one only looked at her information, she didn't have any special background. She was already a silver-ranked mage when she arrived in Bardi. She could be considered a classic example of a self-reliant mage. I didn't believe that a woman like her would need to recognize a traitor as her father and use such a thing to improve her relationship with Bardi. In fact, when she asked that question, she had a disgusted expression, as if she was saying, how could my relative be this person? This was still fresh in my memory. Soon, her explanation made it even harder for them to accept it. According to where she was born, she was a citizen of Bardi. However, she was actually an orphan who was taught magic by a dragon. Later, she became an adventurer in the Bardi Empire. However, when Aulus became an official mage, a large number of adventurer teams were forcefully absorbed into the Bardi Empire. In the end, she chose to leave. I think it's been more than 20 years since the Bardi Empire became an official mage. In that case, Madame Cher is at least 4. As expected of my disciple, she was incredibly perceptive. She immediately found the main point that I was concerned about and even said it first. However, it seemed that Schwelly's movements were also quite fast. Her kick landed squarely on the other party's ankle. She was fast, accurate, and ruthless. Just looking at it made one think that she was actually a monk. Looking at the unlucky Cohen who was crying out in pain after being stepped on, I secretly rejoiced at the fact that my mouth was a step too slow. Then, I sighed at how inexperienced this brat was. Even if he had doubts, he shouldn't say it out loud. Isn't that just courting death? Even a female mage is still a woman. Didn't you see that I've never talked to Heloise, Amelia, and the others about age? That's just suicidal. Right, Amelia's age should be in the 3 digits. If she's the princess of the Elven Empire, could she be in the 5 digits? Fut, she's so old. It hurts. Silly cat, stop scratching me. Damn it, I'm suicidal. I forgot to pay attention to our connection. This time, it wasn't the usual playful tearing. Cher's claws had even been metallized. Heloise didn't hold back at all. I felt a burning pain on my nose. I looked in the mirror at the 8 bloody claw marks on my face, as well as the silly cat who was still clawing at my head. I began to seriously consider how I was going to meet people tomorrow. Perhaps it was time to make a cat skin bib. I was raised by that 3-headed dragon when I could remember. She taught me everything, But she never told me who I was or if I had any relatives. Cher seemed to have lost her patience for idle chatter as she directly told me about her past. Three-headed dragon? Raised you? That's almost legendary. You're so lucky. You actually believed it. I told others later, but they didn't believe me. They said that three-headed dragons didn't exist in the world, and that I only saw them in my dreams. Evelyn obviously existed. From a certain standpoint, Evelyn is my mother. Cher's name, which I had just seen not long ago, caused me to instinctively retract my attitude of thinking that I was lucky. A chill ran down my spine, making me uncomfortable. My premonitions of misfortune were always incredibly accurate. This time, I was afraid that I would truly be in trouble. I'm a fate weaver. The moment Cher opened her mouth, everyone nearby instinctively took a step back. Cher could only smile wryly as she helplessly shook her head. It seemed that she was already used to such treatment. This wasn't because my subordinates were cowardly, but rather because the Fate Weaver job class had such a frightening reputation. The Celestial Tower's experience proved that prophecies were completely unreliable. Changing one's fate would only result in greater misfortune. This was a basic rule that the god of fate had revealed to mortals. However, as mags who feared nothing, how could they possibly submit to fate? And so, this abnormally special job class, Fate Weaver, was born. As a high-level job class that was above the gold rank, the Fate Weaver job class basically had zero requirements to advance. Yep, as long as a mage reached the peak of the silver rank, they would be able to advance into the Fate Weaver job class. As for the success rate, there was a saying that it wasn't that this job class had no requirements, but rather that it had chosen those who could advance into the Fate Weaver job class from the very start. After all, it was impossible for those who weren't chosen to advance into the Fate Weaver job class, so there was no need for any additional requirements. The Fate Weaver job class was so rare that there were no more than 10 of them in the entire continent. It was only natural that the Fate Weaver job class was favored by the god of fate, Cassio. The Fate Weaver job class wasn't a powerful combat job class, and it wouldn't be of any help to casting spells. However, it had two basic abilities. The first ability was to see through an object's past and future, and the second ability was to change the object's future fate. However, since changing the object's fate would only make the object's fate worse, even if the Fate Weaver used this ability out of kindness, such as trying to change someone's fate that was about to die, it would only make that person's death worse. That was why the Fate Weaver job class had another name, Summoner of Misfortune. From a certain standpoint, the Fate Weaver job class was truly vicious in that whoever it looked at would become unlucky, and whoever it looked at would become pregnant, and whoever would become even more unlucky. Our abilities aren't as mystical as the legends make them out to be. Prophecy abilities are no longer as mystical as they were in ancient times. Even if I use my fate gaze at full power, I'll only be able to see what will happen to an inanimate object within 1 minute. Rather than calling it a prophecy, it's more like a prediction. And, our ability to weave fate threads will only bring about negative consequences. That's why we usually don't use our abilities. I had done some research on prophecy and fate magic before, although I hadn't learned anything, so I knew the basics. Stargazers would often trip over the rocks they were stepping on. The more something was related to them, the more difficult it would be to predict it. However, it was publicly acknowledged that this job class was definitely not to be trifled with. It definitely wasn't as useless as she made it out to be. After all, the second-ranked member of the Calamity rankings, the misfortune goddess Ain, was the most famous fate weaver in the world. And after the god of fate Cassio used that god-ranked forbidden spell to transform his divine power into a net that covered the entire mortal plane, the lines of fate should have been thrown into chaos. Prophecy magic should have been rendered useless, so perhaps we could relax a little. Direct prophecy magic is no longer usable. Perhaps we really are the god of fate's favored children. Now, we can actually borrow the power of fate from the divine power net. My power is much stronger than before. Although it's still quite difficult to predict the fate of living creatures, it's quite easy to summon misfortune for them. All I need to do is change the fate threads. Alright then, this time, even I wanted to run away. Cassio's gift is the god of fate's favor for us. He can allow us to bypass all restrictions and directly ask him for an answer. However, we can only do this once in our lives. She paused for a moment. Her tone was rather strange, and her expression was rather unnatural as she looked at me. In the end, there was even more expectation in her eyes. When I was at my most confused, I used this gift. "Where is my family?" And he told me, "The Cloud Tower is waiting for the Lord of the Night." "Your Highness Roland, are you my grandfather?" "No, I'm your father." And then, everyone was astonished. I was so proud of myself that I wanted to laugh out loud, but a dark ominous aura suddenly gathered in front of me, causing me to recall who this person was. It seemed that I had gone too far. Don't take it so seriously. I was just joking, a joke. A hilarious joke. Have you watched Star Wars before? I highly recommend it. It's really amazing. I especially like this line. Alright then, after the silly cat's desperate biting and nearly choking to death on cold water for 3 consecutive days, I learned that some jokes shouldn't be made. Chapter 305. My memory was far more incomplete than I had expected. Since the diary didn't even have any information about me, it probably wasn't a good thing. Forgetting was my own choice. How does it feel to suddenly become a father? Does it feel good? It's complicated. Also, if you purposefully use the word father again, I'll make you into ammunition for my next experiment. I smiled, nodded, and completely accepted Heloise's taunt. Then, I threw out my own threat. However, seeing how she didn't seem to care at all, I knew that such a common punishment wouldn't be enough to scare her. The common punishment in your family is to throw them into an engineering cannon as explosives. Beifeng, I'll be careful. There won't be a next time. I nodded in satisfaction. As expected, threats didn't need to be new. It would be fine as long as they were scary enough. For a certain Banshee Queen who was becoming more and more accustomed to her cat form, a saint rank beast tamer would definitely be a mega enemy. Fortunately, Beifeng still had some basic morals. At the very least, I didn't receive any complaints about him using force. But, to be honest, I felt rather complex when faced with Heloise's intentionally twisted teasing. First of all, I didn't even know if she was my descendant. After all, there were many methods of determining family relationships in this world. However, most of them wouldn't be useful this time. The final result would definitely be unreliable. To determine if 2 people were related by blood, apart from the completely unreliable divination and prophecy magic, one would have to start from the physical body. No matter if it was the secrets of blood or witchcraft that traced the origin of souls, they all required a part of the physical body as the source. But after this revival, my physical body had been completely reconstructed. Although my physical appearance was exactly the same as before, and I looked quite human, I was likely no longer human inside. System. As expected, this system was completely unreliable at critical moments. However, as the Weaver of Fate, Cher had her own opinion on this. I can tell that your fate is related to the source of my birth. Even if you're not my ancestor, you're still deeply connected to my ancestor. Besides, with Renee and Donglan as precedents, even if she was indeed related to me by blood, that didn't mean that she was my descendant. After all, I still had a younger brother who gave me quite a headache. This has nothing to do with me. Second brother Cavendish said it. Alright then, looking at Renee's delighted expression, I didn't know what to say anymore. Are you happy? Yes, of course, if she's your descendant, Big Brother Roland, isn't that also my relative? Other than Little Sister Grimm, I have another family member. Little Sister Grimm? Sister Glyna, right? Only then did I recall that perhaps it was because the missed descendants had a difficult fate. No matter if it was Glyna or Renee, they both fit the criteria of being orphans. Yet, the 2 of them just happened to have a poor relationship. Fine, from a certain standpoint, neither of them could be considered normal people. This was especially true for Glyna, who was a strange person who was difficult to get along with. By the way, how's Glyna doing? It's going well. Now that the north and east have calmed down, there's nothing to worry about. The Slewware Kingdom's recovery is in the best condition. At the very least, she was complaining in her letter 2 days ago, saying that she wanted to go out and play. Little Sister Grimm's workload is much easier than ours. How could we give her such an opportunity? Although Slewware had suffered many losses in the Northern War, it had a strong foundation and was able to recover very quickly after it recovered. Slewware was originally an important trading country, and it was also able to do business with elves and new beast men, so it recovered very quickly after it reopened its trade routes. Donglan, on the other hand, was limited by its population and basic industries. Apart from basic military and defense activities, it would be quite difficult for the country to devote all of its resources to spring plowing. That was why even though Renee and Glyna were both rulers of a country, there was actually a huge difference in difficulty between them. Of course, if one looked at military affairs, it would be the complete opposite. As my most important base in the Northlands, as well as the headquarters of the Church of Law, Donglan's military strength was already at the forefront of the Northlands despite its small size. However, it was also because of Donglan's emphasis on military development that even the Royal Knight Squadron had to participate in the spring plowing. Slewware is still fine, but Donglan's development seems to be rather abnormal. The military and military industries take up far too much of the country, and the land isn't suitable for agricultural development. I hope that Amelia's new crops will have a great harvest this year. Otherwise, I'll have to think of ways to scam money from her. Considering the current situation, I was a little worried. Those domain lords had their own expectations and ambitions. If Renee continued to wander about outside, there would be a lot of trouble if something happened in the country. Why don't you just go back and support the overall situation? I have more than enough manpower here. Although Renee hadn't become queen yet, everyone knew that she was already the ruler of a country. It was evident that she wasn't the type of person who would obediently sit in the royal palace. This time, she came here with the Borealis under the pretext of supporting us. If I go back, won't I just be a rubber stamp? So annoying. Pouting, Renee had a nonchalant expression on her face. My head hurt even more. In a way, she wasn't wrong. The military was taken over by my red hunting hounds, and the political affairs were taken care of by Kelly. Furthermore, the Church of Law was already beginning to surpass the authority of the royal family. From a different perspective, we were no different from traitors who wanted to take control of an orphan daughter of the royal family. Fine, forget it. Do whatever you want. But here. Yeah, it's boring. I don't understand those mag stuff, so I intend to say goodbye to you. Goodbye. Where are you going? The Forest of Dreams or the Ottoman Empire? Although she still had a mischievous smile on her face, it was easy to understand just from the beginning. There was no need to explain the rest in detail. Judging from her calm tone, she had already made up her mind and was only informing me. Yep, it's both practical combat training and to earn some justice points. There are many treasures that I'm interested in. Since the rules were set, they couldn't be easily changed. Renee, who had always followed me, naturally knew just how important justice points were. Since she wanted to become stronger, she was obviously quite interested in justice points. She also knew that this was probably the best time to earn justice points and strengthen herself. Many of the items that I could exchange for were unique. If I wanted them, I would naturally need to act quickly. According to the latest news from the Forest of Dreams, many people had already reached the front lines in the Forest of Dreams, including many powerful hermits. However, Renee's plans weren't so simple. If you need manpower, just say so. If there's nothing else, I'll take the entire Silver Cross Squadron with me, as well as those brats from the Aurora Knight Squadron. It'll be too much of a waste to have them work as shop assistants in the Cloud Tower. I've already bought 5,000 sets of armlets. I'll just treat it as using them for my personal use. It was obvious that she had planned this farewell beforehand. She intended to go to the battlefield. Not only would she be able to train herself, she would also be able to train her troops. In fact, she would even be able to help her knight subordinates obtain justice points together to help them grow stronger. Not only that, she had chosen to lead her own tribe and knight subordinates to grow together and overcome the difficulties together. The light of the spring sun shone through the window as the smiling female knight waved goodbye to me. For some inexplicable reason, I felt as if I had experienced this scene before. Her silver armor gleamed with a thick metallic sheen. Her handsome face had long since lost its former timidity and hesitation. Her smile wasn't forced at all, and the silver Roland sacred sword at her waist was glowing with a resolute will. When I woke up from my daze, I discovered that so much time had passed. Unbeknownst to me, this girl had already become a warrior capable of fighting on her own. Right, I also brought that flag with me. You don't mind if I use it, right? The famous Dragonslayer princess from the Northlands War was still wearing the tattered Mist War flag on her back. At that moment, I paused in surprise for a moment, but then I understood everything. It was obvious that Renee had long since planned this. She wasn't trying to avoid her responsibilities as the ruler of a country. In fact, she believed that there would be endless calamities in the future, and that it would be meaningless to only defend her own territory. After all, that would be a passive defense. Only by obtaining sufficient power would she be able to overcome the difficulties. And now, it was time for her to obtain fame and power. In this world, even an illusory reputation could transform into actual assistance. In the face of calamities and dangers, the title of a hero would attract countless people's trust and allies. That was why she made a choice. She chose to bring the Knight Squadron to experience the battlefield in advance. She chose to leave my protection and obtain the power to protect herself and her people in the face of life and death. Not only would she establish her own reputation, but she would also inject new history and fame into the Mist War flag, allowing the entire land to see what it meant to be a descendant of the Mist. She knew that it would be impossible for her to directly raise this idea in her own country. As the only royalty, Kelly and many other old ministers would definitely oppose her to the death. That was why she used the excuse of providing support and went to the front lines first. Once she had full control of the situation, she would act first and report later. At this moment, although the girl in front of me still had the same appearance, the timid vase princess of the past had disappeared. The one smiling in the face of the future calamities was now a knight princess who had shouldered the trust of her country and citizens. For a long while, I didn't know what to say. Although she was asking for my opinion, she probably hadn't considered the possibility that I would refuse. Would I refuse? Of course not. Since the young eagle had already matured and was ready to spread its wings and leave the nest, how could I force her to hide under my wings? That would only make her an idiot. You're setting me up. Do you really want to see Sister Kelly nag me to death? Hey, Brother Roland, is there something you're afraid of? I'm sorry, I'll write her a letter. In that case, you'll approve, right? If you don't approve, you'll just run away. Honestly, there's not a single person who doesn't make me worry. I smiled and shook my head. I felt both gratified and regretful. I like you the most, Brother Roland. Discovering that her request had been approved, the mature female knight instantly thawed like an iceberg and transformed into a shy young girl with a smile as beautiful as a flower. And then, she pounced on me along with my chair. Asterisk pop. Asterisk my cheek felt a slight chill. By the time I reacted, all that was left in front of me was the faint scent of orange perfume and the figure of a beautiful girl who had escaped. I touched the soft sensation on my cheek, as if her red lips were still the same. I didn't know what to say anymore. It was only after a long while that I managed to squeeze out a sentence. Hey, this little girl sure is passionate. Sometimes, it's gentlemanly to intentionally act dumb when seeing something embarrassing. But sometimes, it's quite excessive to intentionally act dumb even though you know what's going on. Little Roland, what kind of person are you? Shut up, Heloise. Otherwise, I'll feed you to Bayfong. Tactical weapons were far too powerful. The silly cat fell silent for a while. But after a while, I couldn't help but ask another question. Am I really being too excessive? Scum, demon, pervert, bastard, gentleman, Roland, Bayfong. All right then, it would seem that our names were changing into adjectives. But since I was only one rank lower than Bayfong in terms of evil, I really needed to reflect on myself. After Renee escaped as if she was hit and run, my emotions, which had been messed up by Cher's death, became even more chaotic. And, the silly cat just happened to continue adding more trouble for me. Only father, Bayfong, Roland, only father, Bayfong, Roland. Just as I was seriously considering whether or not I should taste her sour cat meat hot pot today and was about to take action, she finally bared her teeth and disappeared into the shadows. After thinking about it for 2 minutes, I turned my attention to something else. Renee is becoming more and more similar to that guy. For some reason, my impression of Renee was becoming more and more similar to that idiot who would do anything for power. But, from another perspective, her determination to fight on the battlefield gave me even more warning. Since I've already made all my plans, it's time for me to focus on my own cultivation. After all, in the end, it's all about power. Even Renee has noticed the main point, so I can't fall behind. Once I'm done with all the recent matters, I'll find a place to cultivate and earn some fate points. As long as this place stabilized, the mortal plane would still have a period of stability before the undead emperors could fully descend. Cavendish's overwhelming power level was like a heavy rock weighing down on my heart. 10 years later, no, perhaps only 7 or 8 years later, the undead emperors that would fully descend would all be threats to me. I had already established my foundation and found my own path for the future. All that was left was to persevere on this path and madly fight to earn fate points in order to increase my power level at an extraordinary speed. Right, if I want to enter legend rank, I need to recover at least 3 soul imprints. I can't use holy light and law for now, but this is the country of mags. My undead magic has long since reached a bottleneck, so I should be able to find the corresponding knowledge here. I need to level up my frigid winter earth, and I need all sorts of elemental materials. It seems that I'll have to properly rob an old friend have a chat with an old friend. Chapter 306. Originally, the Royo Street district was one of the most inconspicuous districts in Arlo. That was because it was also commonly known as the Gnome and Dwarf district. In this land of magic, this place wasn't very popular. Even the land prices here were the lowest. After all, this was the domain of mags. The gnomes and dwarfs' engineering products were nothing more than illusionary fireworks in front of mysterious magic. Although they seemed extravagant, they weren't actually that practical. Engineering cannons? Gnome explosives? They're not as powerful as third circle magic spells, and it's easy to blow yourself up. Most importantly, they're expensive, heavy, and unstable. Gnome harvester armor? A silver-ranked can handle a small one, but a large one costs an astronomical price just to get an energy source. They can't be mass-produced, and their practicality is questionable. A Gnome's Daily Necessities series? Bro, you're joking, right? Do you want to try a toilet that can shoot you into the clouds? A Gnome's sleeping mask that can roast your brains? Yep, there's also the super cool massage chair that's rumored to double the size of your bones. Forget it, those things are better for you to kill yourself. For a long period of time, engineering products were viewed as unreliable. Apart from the fact that gnomes and dwarfs who specialized in engineering were quite unreliable, it was also because of technical limitations. Without a stable supply of energy, how can there be a stable engineering product? Taking the common sense from the alternate world as an example, a car that would randomly choose from the first gear to the 100th gear with a slight step on the accelerator would not be able to sell. A hairdryer and microwave oven that could jump to tens of thousands of volts at any time was simply a mobile bomb. The gnomes and gnomes in this world were far too crude when it came to energy production. They would either add fuel or other flammable materials to power them, which would be incredibly difficult to control. They would also use magical items and minerals from magical beasts that contained a certain amount of energy. That would be a huge waste of money. Not only would their energy conversion rate be incredibly low, they would also be difficult to control once they were activated. Their development of energy was a complete mess. It wasn't that the gnomes and dwarfs didn't care about energy sources. It was that every natural or ancient energy source had its own unique principles and activation methods. They could only be researched individually. When all the parts were different, how could they possibly create a universal energy engine? Since even the energy supply mechanism and ability engine couldn't be mass-produced, engineering products naturally couldn't be mass-produced either, which meant that there was no basic stability to speak of. The gnomes and dwarfs weren't satisfied with such limitations either. Gnome engineering was a typical gnome's way of thinking, or perhaps it should be said that the gnome's style was filled with self-abandonment. Since we don't know when it will explode, we might as well make it a bomb that explodes. That's why there are all sorts of goblin explosions. Over time, it even became a mix of goals and methods of pursuing goals. It became a strange worldview that glorifies even more powerful explosions. Since there's no way to limit the power output, I'll think of a way to increase the power output to the maximum. That's how I came up with those deadly goblin rocket launchers and rocket launchers. It should be said that it was all thanks to the dwarfs' invention of parachutes that the pilots had the possibility of safely returning to the surface. However, the gnome rocket car competition actually became the most popular competition among the gnome species, which was quite incomprehensible. Danger. What was that? Please call him unpredictable passion. This was indeed a response that fit the gnome's style. If it wasn't for the fact that there were explosions in the background, and that there were more than 3 digits in the number of deaths every year, perhaps this answer would have been even more convincing. Meanwhile, the dwarfs' way of thinking was much more normal. At the very least, they were working hard to make up for their current technology's shortcomings. In this process, the dwarfs invented gear sets. They attempted to use gear sets to transmit torque, change speed, and change the direction of torque. They controlled the transmission of power and attempted to make an uncontrollable source of power controllable. It was precisely because of the dwarfs' use of gear sets and conductors that the dwarfs were far more skilled at creating mechas and vehicles than the gnomes. Their mechanical products were also far more detailed. After all, for the gnomes, all squeaky large objects were consumables that brought about passion and explosions. Why would they bother researching such things? However, the gnomes were far superior to the dwarfs when it came to things like rocket launchers and all sorts of dangerous inventions related to explosions and speed. However, with current technology, using gear sets that weren't fully developed to control an immeasurable source of power was akin to using a small boat to control a heavy ironclad battleship. Not only was it completely unreliable, even if it succeeded by chance, the investment would far exceed the benefits, and it would be impossible to mass-produce such a thing. The worst part was that even though the dwarfs' technology wasn't fully developed yet, they believed that as long as they used it often enough, it would definitely succeed. They created a large number of daily tools that could be used to kill people. The end result was that both gnome and dwarf engineers became synonymous with untrustworthy and uneconomical. However, personally speaking, I felt that the dwarfs' methods were slightly more reliable than the gnomes. If they were given another 2,000 or 3,000 years, and if they coincidentally discovered another source of power, perhaps they really would be able to develop a technology similar to the steam civilization. However, with the upcoming calamity, this was obviously impossible. Actually, if the two factions worked together, it was possible for them to develop by leaps and bounds. However, people of the same trade were enemies. Scientists were all stubborn, and it was only natural for researchers who didn't share the same path to view each other as competitors and enemies. It was common for differences in research to escalate into personal conflicts. The gnomes and dwarfs had never had a good relationship. Only in a place like Sulphur Mountain City could the two opposing factions put aside their differences and work together. Finally, there was the mysterious creation of the Roland Titan. Even in a place like Sulphur Mountain City, there was no lack of arguments and fights between the two factions. Only when they were prisoners in prison did they manage to reach a temporary agreement. But now, with Olivia's magic box, there would be a stable energy source. The engineers would be able to put aside their prejudices and disagreements and focus their attention on the more important development and utilization. Every change in power represents a new industrial revolution. And this time, Olivia's magic box will probably bring about the world's first industrial revolution. Although the core of Olivia's magic box was the miracle alchemist Olivia's energy conservation and circulation magic array, it was the master engineers led by Timlad who made it work stably. The latest version of Olivia's magic box 8.1 had even surpassed the previous version in the game's history, which was why all sorts of engineering products were being developed at an exponential rate. Not only did Golden Tooth, Millhouse, and the other gnome and dwarf engineers work hard, Timlad's information also contained the secrets and knowledge of the ancient species. This was a miraculous creation that was born out of necessity. If it wasn't for the fact that the ancient species was facing a crisis of despair, it was likely that Timlad, who was the last member of the ancient species in the game's history, wouldn't have handed over his treasures. And now, Royo Street District had become the great industrial party's personal territory after a series of mergers and hiring. Yep, mergers and acquisitions. Basically, I was going to buy his entire shop, and then his employees would naturally become mine. Then, I would turn the shop into a factory. Although it would cost quite a bit, I had been earning quite a bit recently. Plus, I had saved up quite a bit, so I didn't feel too much pressure. There were plenty of gnome, dwarf, and dwarf engineers trying to make a living in the Mage Country. However, the most popular businesses in the Mage Country were obviously smithing, alchemy, and enchantment. Smithing and engineering were closely related, and the Mage Country lacked manpower. I also welcomed alchemists. For the gnomes and dwarfs, engineering was their daily life. Even the gnome master alchemists were quite skilled in engineering, so it would be quite easy for them to work for an archmage with such high technology. No, it should be said that the gnomes and dwarfs were incredibly sensitive to the new generation's changes and new technologies. They had already gone crazy over my technology. What infuriated them the most was the fact that this historical invention wasn't one of their own species' creations. They were all holding their breaths. In fact, when I mentioned that Thorn Garden was hiring engineers and alchemists, and that I would be offering a 10-year long-term employment contract, many top-level gnome enchanters and dwarven alchemists volunteered to join us. In fact, there was even a myth-rank gnome archmage named Cromwell Manostorm, who was an expert in the field of magical marionette creation. He pitifully came to apply for the job with his apprentice-level engineering certificate. Actually, I've always wanted to be an engineer. Hey, don't go. I can work for you while researching new technologies. Don't you want to see the combination of runic magic puppets and engineering? That's definitely the scariest, cutest little thing in all of history. The dwarf archmage's high-pitched voice echoed in the room, and dangerous bright purple mana waves caused the room to rumble. I even suspected that if I refused him, he would directly destroy the entire room. Fine, sign this 10-year employment contract. You're also Roland's subordinate. Hey, you're not even going to look at it. You trust me too much. Heh, as long as you give me that technology, I'm even willing to give up all of my assets. It's only 10 years of work, it's nothing. Besides, I've already heard about your deeds from my tribe, and I'm looking forward to serving you. The white-bearded old man had a proud smile on his face, as if we were the ones signing the contract, and this wasn't the first archmage to express goodwill to me. However, what was surprising was that the vast majority of archmages that came into contact with me at this time weren't human archmages. I had enough manpower, funds, and technology, so the construction of buildings here was quite swift. Royo Street was now my territory. Of course, the side effect was that it would be quite difficult for other mags to find these foreign species to work for them. They could only look for human smiths and alchemists. Doing too much would naturally attract hostile gazes, but why would I care? The next batch of products. The interstellar gunner mechas and Sith warrior mechas should be ready already, right? Let's start selling them. Right, it's time to speed things up. Each mecha must be worth 10 justice points before they can be sold. Perhaps the amount isn't much, but I should at least force them to think of a way to get it. But sometimes, things wouldn't develop so smoothly. I'm really sorry, but I'm afraid that we don't have enough money to simultaneously purchase and manufacture so many production lines. How is that possible? Thorn Garden's profits are quite high, right? The purchase of real estate is also within our expectations, so how could we not have enough money? Did you all miscalculate? You've already signed so many master engineers and archmages for 10-year contracts. Just the relocation fees and down payments are no small sum. It's over budget. Besides, my lord, you suddenly have 4 research projects, especially that Roland 7 project. It's ridiculous how much money you're burning every day. Everyone in the finance department thinks that it's best for you to stop some of your research projects. I didn't know what to say as I looked at the cowardly young accountant who had been pushed out here to take the blame for his colleagues. Although I could think of other ways to transfer funds from other sources, that would definitely slow down the progress. I hesitated for a moment, but in the end, I still came up with a devious idea to first obtain some funds. How about we do something a little more devious? After I told them my plan, the atmosphere cooled down for a while. I heard that robbing and scamming will cause you to lose the power of law, right? You're. Hearing this, I smiled proudly. We're not robbing or scamming. Do you think those unskilled jobs can make as much or as fast as us? Chapter 307. Did you buy it? When this greeting spread among the mags, no one could have predicted what would happen. I had a dream yesterday. I dreamed that my ancestor sent me a message. This time, it's definitely going to be red, blue, red, purple, black, and white. Did that sound rather difficult to understand? Each color represented a choice. This was nothing more than an alternative combination of numbers, which was quite easy to understand. Yes, this was the lottery. Apart from some random archmage who didn't know how to play the game, who else would think of selling the lottery in a magical fantasy world to make money? And this brat who received a message from his ancestor was just like a lottery addict who received his deceased grandfather's relic and decided to gamble his entire fortune on a single number. Of course, compared to all sorts of insider trading, the winner of the lottery in a certain dimension might even be the organizer of the lottery. I was quite kind, so I probably thought of a way to swindle 30% of the total prize money. What? Not kind? Actually, compared to some of my peers, I was already quite kind. And the winner wouldn't just receive gold coins. After all, there were quite a few mags who didn't lack money. Precious magical ingredients, limited edition items from Thorn Garden, justice points, and even the chance to inherit the legacy of an emblematic truth-level archmage were all invested into the prize pool. Naturally, the mags were unable to maintain their composure. The winning rate of the previous few lotteries was also deliberately adjusted. Quite a number of people won the consolation prize, the limited edition Iron Horse number 8. The winners happily rode their new mount, nicknamed Red Lightning, and raced around, driving some enthusiasts into a frenzy. What was Red Lightning? It was a modified version of Iron Horse number 7 with just a layer of red paint. What? Even if the upgraded version was quite a scam. I was actually quite kind. At the very least, I didn't make it seem like changing the color of the Iron Horse's shell was a limited edition, and I even changed its name. Fine then, I was a scammer. Were there any successful merchants in this day and age who weren't scammers? At the very least, I provided entertainment and made money, which also made enthusiasts happy. And some things would be difficult to stop once they started. This was especially true for the simple locals. Once they started buying, how could they possibly stop? Once they really fell for the trap, the prize money became secondary. The excitement and anticipation of winning the lottery was the most fascinating part. And this was only the beginning. The more I used the same kind of excitement, the more numb I would become. I would need to constantly introduce new projects. Who do you think will win this time? Is it the Goldtooth Brothers Super Apollo, or the Mana Storm Brothers Crazy Gear 07? I think it should be the same as last time. Both sides will explode into the sky before they reach the end. Damn it, who could have won the last time? I bet on the dwarf, and I ended up losing a lot of money. You guys don't know the temperament of those engineers at all. Last time, I bet that both sides would not reach the finish line. That's 3 times the odds. But it's a pity that I'm still too conservative. Otherwise, I could earn more. F***ck, you've already crushed such a weird result. What's there to be conservative about? I was actually very hesitant at that time. At that time, I should have bet that both parties would not walk half the distance. That's 9 times the odds. Impressive. Next time, we'll follow you to buy. By the way, did you hear? No one made it to the finish line this time. The odds are now 1 o'clock. 8. What a scam. But it seems like I can only press it there. Are you guys stupid? I heard that both sides were so angry that they spent a lot of effort to improve it. Also, Blue Tower's Iron Horse is participating. Do you think no one will make it to the finish line? How come I've never heard of this before? What a scam. The organizers are so sly. Gnome versus gnome, I have to say, the card with the same name is really a scam, was the most popular competition recently. Gnome engineers and gnome engineers would assemble all sorts of racing cars and race over obstacles. At the same time, both sides could interfere with each other. It was common for them to throw rockets and mini-bombs at each other, and whichever side reached first would win. But since both sides fought for real at the end of the last competition, they were both blown up into the sky. Many people were dissatisfied with the lack of a victor, so this time, they joined the Iron Horse team. Although their equipment was far slower than the engineers' standard iron horses, as long as the other engineers self-destructed and blew each other up along the way, the Iron Horse team would naturally become the sole champion. That was why after the news spread, the Iron Horse team actually became the hottest topic of discussion. But, what are the odds like? What's the best way to earn the most? The gnomes are the least favored. They'll blow up at least a few times along the way. The most favored team is Blue Tower's Iron Horse team. If they win, the odds are too low. We'll basically be working for them this time. Alright, give Golden Tooth and the others the newest stabilizer engine and loosen up the gears for Mana Storm. This time, the gnomes will be the winner. Right, is the new project ready? Of course. Gnomes vs Dwarfs 2, Hot Air Balloon Airship vs Battle Helicopter. It's about to go on sale. Yep. Do more publicity for me. Sell more tickets for the same season. Make preparations to scam money, sell tickets. But remember that only gold and above can be pilots. According to the way they play, those who aren't strong enough will be killed sooner or later. Is there any news from the other mage organizations? Every time the tickets for the Iron Horse team, which were only available for luxury class seats and above, were made into special cards for raffle sales. There was also a promotion where anyone who bought a set of these cards would receive a free Iron Horse. Of course, since 2 of the numbered cards didn't even have 2 digits, this lucky draw game, which seemed like anyone who bought a high-class ticket, actually hadn't given out many free prizes yet. There are some mage organizations that have opinions about this competition, but there's basically no one who's protesting. After all, there's too little entertainment in this world, and everyone's too free. Even those who aren't participating in the competition can join in on the fun. Still, there are quite a few who want to participate. But, they want to be able to use their own mounts, such as phantom horses or hellwalkers. Let them participate next time. I've already prepared the advertising slogan, Mage Rangers who are avenging the failed Blue Tower. But, we need to test them beforehand. We need to test their speed and natural talent abilities first. Don't create another Dragon Knight or Frost Giant, or else there'll be no profit at all. The first few rounds allowed the other participants to participate freely. This continued until a top-level summoner participated and summoned a flying semi-dragon that flattened the gnome's flying car, and a Frost Giant kicked the gnome pilot away. Magic Storm in the sky, don't use your stinky boots to kick gnomes, and don't kick gnome mechas away. In order to make the competition less suspenseful, the competition began limiting the number of participants and announcing all the participants' information beforehand. But no matter who wins, will be the ones who make the most profit in the end. From a certain standpoint, this was indeed a very problematic way of manipulating the match. Since they were already shamelessly gambling, it didn't seem like it would be a big deal if they were shamelessly fixing the match. But based on my usual understanding, good things wouldn't last long. The Mystical Blades Tax Department is here again. They want to audit our accounts. TSK, these scavenger birds have such sharp noses. Tell them that this isn't under their jurisdiction. This isn't a trading event, but an organized competition. As for those small bets, the mage country doesn't have a gambling tax yet, right? Tell them that they'll collect it after the law is passed. Okay, but what about Milady? Milady? Who? Lady Cher. This time, she's leading the team again. As expected, my daughter was such a waste of money. It had only been a few days, but she was already siding with an outsider. Wait a moment, who said that she was my daughter? This was still unknown. Unknown. She's not my family's Milady, and I don't have a daughter. How am I supposed to live like this? I'm not even married yet. What if this spreads? That little girl? Just let her wait outside. Suddenly, that brat had a rather strange expression as he looked at me. Then, I heard a light cough behind me that sounded quite familiar. Cough, I'm relieved that you think like that. Come, everyone, let's audit the accounts together. Let's first check Thorn Garden's transaction tax. Be careful, the owner of this shop is incredibly sly. Just looking at the accounts won't work. Let's start with the storeroom first. The blue-haired girl started angrily giving orders to her companions. It would seem that I was going to lose money again. No, I couldn't give up yet. That girl might seem tough, but she was actually quite soft-hearted. Perhaps it would be useful to ask her for help. Wait, my good daughter, it's not easy for Daddy to earn some money. At the very least, leave some money for retirement. At this moment, everyone was astonished at how shameless a certain someone was. Meanwhile, the silly cat that had brought Harlois here with her was laughing so hard that she was rolling around on the ground. Thanks to all the enthusiastic individuals helping me out, falling into my trap, my fundraising became incredibly smooth. Of course, there were some side effects, such as my reputation becoming even stranger. What was my reputation? Was it edible? I was truly impressed by this alternate dimension that lacked entertainment. Even the most experienced and knowledgeable mags had rather simple and boring daily lives. In the face of certain temptations, it was actually quite easy to scam them due to their lack of control over money. In the end, when I did some quick calculations, I actually made more money than Thorn Garden. Of course, if I made money, I would naturally have to spend it. As long as I made money worth it, the treasures of an archmage that was several hundred years old wouldn't be any inferior to the treasures of a dragon. I was quite tempted by this. As a mage, the most attractive thing to me was obviously the secrets of magic. Of course, since I specialized in a rather unorthodox direction, it would naturally cause some controversy. You want to make a deal with the Sword of Order's subordinate organization, the Soul Ghost Association? Their reputation is absolutely terrible. They're an organization entirely made up of undead mags. Grave robbing and other such things are as common as eating a meal for them. Aren't you afraid that your reputation will be affected? Can my reputation be worse than Yongye's? This single sentence stopped everyone else from complaining. I looked at the information that the black-robed mags left behind with satisfaction. From a certain standpoint, although Heloise had taught me the basics of undead magic, most of my undead magic was still incomplete and self-taught. My undead magic wasn't on the same path as these ghosts in the shadows who had organized their research. Comparing my undead magic with them was quite beneficial. Speaking of which, if it wasn't for Yongye's reputation, these undead mags who had no moral limits would never have agreed to such an equivalent exchange method that they despised. Even if they had obediently agreed to a trade, they wouldn't have given me such valuable information. A large amount of undead magic information was placed in front of me. Many of them were rare and exclusive recipes. Although I still didn't know how to repair undead magic soul imprints, this information was more than enough to make up for my lack of knowledge and give me plenty of inspiration. Amelia has already surpassed me. The Forest of Dreams and the Wood Spirits are truly enviable. With this information, although I won't be able to create an undead lord at the original sin level, I can still try creating something new. Chapter 308. My fireballs will tear you to shreds. Ha, have a taste of my guns. In Arlo's Glory Arena, a battle between a high-level mage and an archer was underway. Normally speaking, the archer would constantly adjust the distance and angle, making all sorts of fancy dodging moves in search of an opportunity to land a killing blow. However, if the archer was riding an archer, they would have an obvious advantage in mobility and attack frequency. Meanwhile, a high-level mage would often use the exact opposite strategy. They would first cast a large number of defensive spells on themselves and then summon a bunch of cannon fodder. Only then would they find an opportunity to kill the archer while maintaining a balance of attack and defense. However, this time, it was still an elven ranger versus a mage. The audience was confused. The purple-haired elven ranger wasn't using the elves' usual enchanted longbow. Instead, he was using the dwarven musket that the audience had always looked down upon. His mount wasn't a holy unicorn or a pegasus, either. Instead, it was a rumbling iron horse. The high-level elf wore a black punk leather jacket and a leather hat. He held the front of his horse with one hand and spun in circles at high speed. He jumped, climbed up the wall, stopped suddenly, and stood on his hind legs. His other hand held a silver shotgun. He took advantage of the gaps in the battle to continuously attack his opponent. However, unlike the dwarven musket's low-power lead bullets, this high-quality shotgun covered in silver magic paint and embedded with diamonds shot out colorful magic bullets. The handsome elven ranger seemed to be quite confident. He was also quite calm and composed. His hand would shake from time to time and the shotgun would automatically reload. The wind caused his hair to flutter in the wind, making him seem even more carefree. This caused the girls in the audience to scream in surprise. However, his opponent wasn't affected at all. The silver-armored mage ignored his opponent's attacks and simply cast spells from his stance. Blizzard, frostfall, chain hailstones, icicles, and many other high-level AoE spells kept raining down on his opponent. It was as if he was a nouveau riche who had unlimited mana. Meanwhile, his opponent's magical musket would only leave a hole in the wall or a deep hole in the ground. However, when it hit the mage's armor, it would only create dazzling sparks. Meanwhile, the mage's random AoE spells caused the Iron Horse archer to panic. The archer's attack power was definitely not low. The gold-ranked archer Ad could already use these magic guns to perform the magic archery that was unique to the elves. The only reason why his attack was ignored was because the opponent's armor was too ridiculously strong. It was just a silver armor that covered his entire body. The result of being completely sealed was that even his face couldn't be seen. Under the black crystal protective mask was a face that was as calm as ice. The metal shell was flashing with the unique brilliance of mithril, and the magic field on it formed an additional 3 layers of protection. The dazzling dragon crystal in front of his chest emitted terrifying magic waves. Any tycoon who saw this armor would shout, "Where did this tycoon come from?" The silver thorny rose emblem on the back of the power armor undoubtedly indicated that this power armor was Thorngarden's newest product, rich, capricious. Number 1. Yep, from a certain standpoint, this incredibly strange name was the best explanation for this full set of mithril armor. The built-in energy source was currently providing 3 layers of protection: magic field, ice, and lightning. The thick and heavy mithril armor was the best material for magic. With these 4 layers of protection, it was impossible for Ad's magic bullets to pierce through the armor. He kept saying things like "we hit the opponent," but he bounced off, or "we didn't hit his armor," which made him quite annoyed. Everyone knew that it was impossible to win if one only defended and didn't attack. Unless something unexpected happened that twisted the situation, Ad, who had recently become quite popular in the arena, would definitely lose. It's over. When the Iron Horse motorcycle slid over a thin layer of ice created by a snowstorm, its tires suddenly skidded. When the motorcycle lost control, an ice prison descended upon it. Ad unhesitatingly raised his hands and surrendered as he was locked onto by Ad's powerful magic. That's 15 consecutive victories. Even the Blood Moon Hunter Ad lost, and it's such a one-sided battle. Isn't this armor a little too ridiculous? In the Cloud City, mags and warriors who loved to fight had their own places of entertainment. It was even rarer to have gambling matches. The Abo Arena was such a place. Every day, countless battles would take place here. Some battles would simply be a competition of strength, some would be simulations to accumulate practical experience, and some would be teacher-student duels. Of course, there would also be battles where one's life was at stake. However, today's duel was the most common daily gambling match. Both sides would place their bets on items of equal value. Not only would they accumulate combat experience, but they would also gain practical benefits and fame. However, since the arena wasn't suitable for mags, most of the competitors were warriors or rangers. They were either natives of the mage country or the personal guards of certain mags. Ad was the personal guard of a certain high elf prince. He was a rather famous ranger archer back in his hometown. After he obtained the Iron Horse and magic spear from Thorngarden, he swiftly learned how to shoot arrows at high speed. Many opponents who were originally stronger than him were defeated by his high speed and fast-paced attacks. And after he obtained 10 consecutive victories, he met the most difficult opponent of all. This was a mage who wore a full set of mithril mobile armor. This archmage was capable of making dragons seem so poor in front of Ad. Ad didn't need any positioning or defensive magic. All he needed to do was stand there in his heavy mobile armor. Ad's enemies wouldn't be able to break through the armor's defenses. He then slowly chanted his own incantation and acted like a stationary cannon. If he ran out of mana, he could even draw energy from the energy pool. His defense was incredibly high, and his mana was limitless. This archmage was shameless to the extreme. Damn rich guy. Be careful not to be robbed by dragons. The audience was also cheering for this new star. Rich Man was indeed the nickname of this unknown mage. Obviously, the highest spell that he used was only at the pinnacle of the silver tier. However, he managed to defeat many strong opponents, including 2 legendary tier opponents. If Ad's ability to adapt to new technology proved that science and technology were combat strength, then this mage had proved an even more fundamental truth: those who were rich were the boss. Of course, since this mage was so rich, most people guessed that he was at least a legend-ranked archmage. It was even possible that he was a top-level archmage. When the glittering mage slowly walked into his resting room, he collapsed to the ground. The vent on his chest spewed out a large amount of steam. On the other side, several gnome and gnome engineers had long since prepared for this. They immediately started taking off the helmet's components. When the helmet was taken off, an abnormally young face was revealed. Cohen, how do you feel? That's right, this damn rich guy wasn't some archmage. It was my little acolyte Cohen, a 4-elemental swordcaster who might not even be considered a silver rank. I'm using dragon crystals to replenish my mana. I have an endless supply of mana, but dragon crystals are so precious. Don't worry. Just keep playing. Treat it as a chance to practice. As for dragon crystals and mana information, relax, someone's paying for it this time. In a certain world, war was the catalyst for the explosive growth of technology. Only when people were pushed to their limits would they bring out unreliable technologies, and then think of ways to obtain results that could be used for slaughter. Magical engineering was a new discipline that was born out of the fires of war. It was also destined to grow alongside war. When Thorngarden released new products, all sorts of engineering tools became incredibly popular. For example, the 2 mechas called Star Ranger, Sith Warrior, and Jedi Knight were extremely popular the moment they were released. However, this was unexpected. In fact, we didn't even list them as our main products. After all, although these 2 mechas greatly increased the user's mobility and defense, and they were even equipped with a miniature energy source, they were made of metal, which would have an obvious effect on mana transmission. If it were the 4 elemental swordcasters or magic archers who relied on peripherals to cast magic spells, then they would be able to ignore the interference of magic, but pure mags obviously wouldn't be suited for such a casting environment. However, I still underestimated how rich these mags were. Indeed, current technology was limited, but the wealth of a tycoon was limitless. As long as all the mecha's components were made of top-level materials themselves would have mana. Even if the blueprints were the same, if there was too much of a difference in the quality of the materials, then it would naturally be a completely different creation. Metal affecting magic spells? Wouldn't all enchanted mithril affect magic spells? These were all top-level mithril created by great alchemists. The only difference was that they were slightly more expensive, probably 100 times more expensive than gold of the same weight. Lacking mana amplification materials? Just take out a basket full of dragon crystals. Do you have phoenix feathers or demon hearts wholesale? Do you have the fur of a gigantic wolf king that was only produced in the North Plain? As long as you wanted to, you could even find the dragon eyes of an inferno dragon in the lower plains. Don't you know how to inscribe defensive magic arrays? If a truth-level enchanter were willing to serve you, would you need to inscribe absolute defense, super long-range precise teleportation, or meteor shower or something? Only a 4th circle spell? You dare to look down on me? The mechas would be too heavy and slow to move. Are you joking with me? What about the goblins' rocket backpacks? We could just inscribe a few more anti-gravity magic arrays that would reduce the mecha's weight. We had top-level materials anyways. Right, don't forget to hire elven smiths to do some more work. I want angel wings on the helmet, and the mechas should be the most popular steampunk style. I want 2 volcanoes on the mecha's shoulders and illusions that spew out flames at regular intervals. How cool would that be? I also want an eye patch with 3 red glowing emeralds. I want an evil dragon's eye. Alright then, apart from the last mage whose request made me doubt his sense of aesthetics and chinibia, the other archmages were quite reliable. They were all aiming for practical combat effects and survival. The most important thing was that they had money and had many years of savings. They discovered that it was highly likely that they would have to go onto the battlefield soon and face opponents that they weren't confident in defeating. Yet, they valued their own lives, so of course they were willing to spend money to save their own lives. After doing some calculations, I unhesitatingly gave the job of making the mechas to be done by others, while I personally took charge of the most profitable part, the custom-made mechas. However, the prerequisite for long-term business deals was that you would get what you paid for. High-priced mechas had to be of the same quality as high-priced mechas. If the archmages wanted to continue spending money at all costs, and even continuously invest in mechas, they would at least have to prove that the quality of their mechas was worth the price. That was how the novice Cohen came to where the rich, willful Mecha number 1 went on stage for the competition. There were many top-level mags watching the competition. In fact, there were even some top-level mags who personally went on stage to test the true defensive capabilities of this priceless golden armor. After learning that the owner of this mecha was a novice who had only been in contact with magic for less than 2 years, he unhesitatingly increased his investment by more than 3 times. He wanted to ensure that his own custom-made mechas would surpass this mecha number 1. Actually, this made me heave a sigh of relief. Otherwise, I would have to think of a way to make up for the lack of materials. Where would the lack of materials come from? I hadn't even started custom making yet, had I? Back in the olden days, tailors would always have an unspoken rule when buying materials to make clothes. When buying materials to make a custom-made cucumber, each roll of cloth would be slightly more than what the tailor expected. Then, as long as they made a few more pieces, the tailor would mysteriously have an extra piece of cloth for themselves. I didn't have any top-level magic materials here. This willful mecha number 1 was made from the scraps from all the orders that I had received. If I didn't receive more orders in the future, this would be quite a large hole. I gave Cohen a few words of encouragement and told him to continue accumulating combat experience here while continuing to show off the power and combat strength of the economic garden. He would also be able to test out the mechas. I couldn't help but sigh. Mechas are far more useful than expected. Even the inventor can't predict what his creation will be like in the end. I originally thought that this was nonsense, but I never thought that I would actually see it one day. Whenever I thought about how, due to my butterfly effect, top-level mags would be armed to the teeth on the battlefield in the future, transforming these weak firepower points that were protected by their comrades into impenetrable mobile turrets. Even the shadow assassins wouldn't be able to kill the forbidden spell mags one by one. I felt that history might have already taken a different path. When the time comes, we'll be facing a group of demons wielding ancient greatswords and evil gods riding gigantic beasts, while we'll be facing archmages wearing mechas, archers riding motorcycles, taurens with heavy cannons, and zombies with electric saws. If we fight as a team, I just feel like something's wrong. After I left the arena, my work wasn't over yet. I had unknowingly become the largest arms dealer in the Cloud Tower, but I still had another project that I needed to check on. But this time, it wasn't a place where I could do it openly. We traveled for more than 2 hours in a horse carriage, crossing several mountains and rivers. The sky was almost dark when we finally arrived at a graveyard on the outskirts of the city. That was our destination. The moment dusk arrived, a chilly wind blew through the mountains, causing the surrounding trees to shake as if they were demons. Our horses seemed to be possessed by something as they collapsed to the ground, unwilling to move. Sigh, every time we arrive here, we can only move on our own. No wonder the hell demons like this place so much. The negative energy here is comparable to the undead plains. It would be strange if the corpses here weren't haunted. Judging from the environment here, these corpses are probably the result of a failed experiment. As a half-undead creature, Heloise would always be especially spirited whenever she came here. A black cat would appear and disappear in the shadows in such a remote and desolate area, making it seem like something out of a ghost story. Look over there. It's so remote, but there's actually a farm here. It must be the Hell Demon's hidden scouts. Do you really think that farming here will yield anything? You'll only produce ghouls. Alright then, I also knew that unless there was something wrong with their head, who would want to set up a farm here in such a haunted place with chilly winds? Although we had cooperated with the Hell Demons and bought this land of the dead where negative energy gathered, it was evident that they still hadn't given up on collecting additional information. But our target is on this piece of land. How's the big guy's condition? Heloise quietly sat on the ground, her eyes somewhat wooden. Meanwhile, her clone was collecting all sorts of information for her. Soon, her eyes were filled with energy again. Excellent, he's already entered a dormant period. He'll be able to move out in about half a month. I nodded in satisfaction. Since everything was going smoothly, we could come back in half a month to reap the fruits of our labor. It's just that those Hell Demons brats came to check several times. It seems that they still haven't given up and want to know why we bought this land. No wonder. After all, this is the Lord of Yungye's goal. It's only natural that ordinary undead mags would be quite tempting. Let them take a look. It's not like they'll be able to tell anything. After all, who would have thought that all we really want is this land filled with negative energy? We don't even need individual corpses. Our new creation is this graveyard. Graveyard Demon was the name that we gave it not too long ago. It was a half-undead, half-earth elemental creature formed from graveyard dirt that was filled with negative energy. It was a powerful source of negative energy pollution. Not only could it greatly increase the undead's combat strength, it was also the home of small to medium-sized undead. These undead beasts are not our original invention. There should be similar existences among the undead in ancient times, but there are no such giant undead beasts in modern times. It is an experimental product that we made with reference to ancient documents and current technological conditions. When I was in the Forest of Dreams, I was most envious of the Forest of Dreams buffs and Jill's ability to modify the environment. Since I couldn't choose the battlefield, I would think of a way to make the battlefield my home ground. Graveyard demons were useful here. They were mobile graveyards that the undead could replenish their negative energy, change their limbs, and strengthen their combat strength at any time. As long as an injured undead didn't die on the spot, they would be able to quickly recover their combat strength in this graveyard. The wood spirit's combat style gave me some inspiration. Perhaps the undead didn't need any powerful troop types anymore. What they lacked were healing and support types like druil and priests. The undead army was already skilled at attrition battles. If they could obtain the ability to replenish themselves on the battlefield, they would be far more effective at increasing their combat strength than any other powerful troop type. Of course, this wasn't the only reason why we left the city by ourselves. The crow in the sky had already landed on the black cat's head. Then, it transformed into a silver liquid and disappeared. Harlois, who had received the information from the female worm's aerial reconnaissance, nodded slightly at me. I was instantly overjoyed. So the big fish has finally taken the bait.